Chapter 861. Snake Tongue suddenly woke up from her meditative state. The living room of the yacht was empty. Yin Lu was nowhere to be seen. The virtual work area was still lit up, and the interface was constantly refreshing with information. Ability users from all over the world were revolving around the hot topic of last night. Wave after wave of discussions were launched, and the keywords were none other than Luo Nan, the airship, the Amaterasu order, and so on. For the spectators, the matter was over, and it was time for them to show their strength. But for the people involved, was it really over? Snake Tongue looked at the time. It was approximately 4 a.m. It had only been 5 or 6 hours since the intercontinental airship incident. The atmosphere in Ban City was still very low, making her heart feel heavy. Snake Tongue adjusted her aura and followed the feeling in her heart. She slowly stood up. There was no one around, but she still took traditional steps out of the living room and took the small elevator to the upper deck. There were few lights on the passenger terminal, but the darkest hour had passed. The railings on the deck chairs, and other decorations all revealed their silhouettes in the dusk. At the same time, there was a figure at the bow of the ship, who knew how long it had been standing there. Secretary Yin. Madam North Mountain. Even though they had adjusted it many times, the way they addressed each other was not precise enough. They were unfamiliar and polite, just like their relationship. Don't you want to rest for a while? There are some matters in the headquarters that need to be dealt with. Thank you for your hard work. D City was 3 hours earlier than Ban City, so it was about time to deal with things. Needless to say, some things did not care about time. Just like this moment. Snake Tongue only casually greeted him. Her gaze and mind were cast outside the yacht. The bow of the anchored yacht was pointing towards the east. The lake was vast, and one could see everything at a glance. One could even see the glaze that had been quietly painted on where the water met the sky. At this time, the ground was still being colored layer by layer. A few clouds were piled there randomly. Stirred by the changing colors, they vaguely turned into indigo mountains, adding a sense of composition to the design. Snake Tongue furrowed her brows slightly. She looked at the sky and clouds in the distance, which were gradually brightening. The feeling in her heart seemed to have been illuminated a little, but it still wasn't vivid enough. Yin Lu followed her line of sight and gently exhaled. Is it sunrise? I thought there would be no sun today, thick clouds, and low atmospheric pressure. It doesn't feel good enough. The conversation that had been going on and on was suddenly stuck here. In fact, both sides of the conversation had captured a common understanding from each other's perception. They didn't say anything else and just stared at the boundary of the water and sky from afar. The sun was still below the horizon, but at this moment, in the layers of glaze, in the indigo mist mountain range, there was clearly a different type of power stirring restlessly. It was hidden deep under the vast laws of nature, but it could not wait to stretch out its claws. It was even half a step beyond the newborn sun. In the eastern horizon, it pressed out a ferocious shape. Yun! Yin Lu exclaimed. The azure cloud peak that was piled up on the horizon suddenly collapsed. Then, under the distortion of that clear power, branches were pulled out, almost losing the nature that clouds should have, turning into the shadow that came with that power, following the contours of the sky and the water body, extending in all directions. The amount of clouds over there wasn't much. After a few stretches, they became so thin that they couldn't be seen. However, the image of the roots spreading out, piercing into the void, and supporting the structure of water and sky was still deeply engraved in Snake Tongue and Yin Li's pupils and hearts. The Fusang Divine Tree. Snake Tongue subconsciously extended her hand, wanting to cover her eyes, but it was already too late. She lowered her arm halfway, and her face turned pale. She had just looked directly at the operation of a high-level power and subconsciously analyzed it. It had caused quite a bit of a backlash for her. Who knew how many unlucky people were like her in the past few minutes in the entirety of Ban City? Yin Lu was much better off because she was already used to borrowing the power of the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District to observe high-level things. Although the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District seemed to have changed again. What method is this? Ian Lee's mind was suspended in the Abyss District, painstakingly distinguishing the deeper meaning behind the turbulent storm. Unfortunately, her level wasn't high enough. She became more and more confused as she watched. It's nothing more than a seal. Snake Tongue was unable to sense the details, but she understood the gist of it even more. It's not a good thing. Ian Lee's thoughts were chaotic. The Amaterasu Order wants to make a move in Ban City. This is their headquarters. This isn't the first time. Snake Tongue paused for a moment, then concluded, it just depends on who they're targeting. Ian Lu suddenly turned her head. Where is Mr.? Yeah, where was Luo Nan? Even at this critical moment, that person had stubbornly disappeared without a trace. Whether it was Snake Tongue or Ian Lu, they could half guess and half feel the faint light of the first rays of dawn. They could feel the gradually extending and gradually permeating psychic pressure. There was still a bit of coolness in the northern mountain lake during the early hours of the morning. But as the faint light of dawn enveloped them, their bodies inexplicably felt a bit hot and dry. It stirred their energies, making them feel quite uncomfortable. This change was much more direct and sharp than the change in the clouds at the edge of the sky. Snake Tongue lowered her eyelids and tightened her mind. She whispered, don't expose yourself to the outside. Indeed. Ian Lu gave one last glance at the light of the clouds at the edge of the sky. She turned around and walked back, but she hadn't taken 2 steps when she sensed something at the same time as Snake Tongue. In the blink of an eye, the two saw a small flying machine suddenly soar into the sky from the warehouse at the dock. It didn't obey the traffic rules of the peaceful trade market. It flew straight into the clouds and soon disappeared from their line of sight. Ian Lu and Snake Tongue glanced at each other. They both furrowed their brows. In this kind of situation, as long as one was an ability user, they would have to make some sort of reaction. However, most of them would be like Ian Lu and Snake Tongue. They would be muddle-headed and make guesses. Captain Jimmy's reaction was too obvious. This wasn't strange. After all, they were backed by Quantum Corporation and even the government and military. On the other hand, over at the inner world, the two hurriedly returned to the living room on the lower deck. It was quite strange. As they entered the shadowy area of the cabin, the discomfort brought about by the disturbance of energy naturally calmed down. The effects were immediate. They just didn't know if this was a temporary phenomenon. The projection work area was still flickering at this time. The interface where Luo Nan and the Amaterasu Order spammed before finally had some other elements mixed in, Ban City, Fantasy Clouds. This topic had just appeared for a few seconds when another freshly baked topic flipped to the top. Ban City's sunrise. Please help me decipher it. Vitality is restless. I nearly went berserk just now. The coordinates are the Shitian district of Ban City. The Divine Tree's Kingdom of Heaven descends. Since the topics discussed in the forum were closely related to Ban City, the words that followed easily swept away a large amount of attention from the world. Ian Lu opened a few posts and similar topics became very influential. She used the waterfall mode of intelligent categorization to automatically select keywords. She scrolled for over half an hour, but the more she scrolled, the more she scrolled. However, the majority of the posts were pictures, descriptions, conjectures, and the like. Aside from pointing the spearhead at the Amaterasu Order, there wasn't anything useful. Ian Lee's brows furrowed. She wanted to go to a more professional circle to take a look. Just as she left the post page, she saw a new post that was highlighted, pinned to the top, and other effects. It forcefully appeared in the very center of the work area. The bright red words were extremely glaring. Most importantly, the poster was from the Ban City branch of the Ability User Society. Ian Lee's wristband buzzed and vibrated at this moment. She lowered her head to glance at it, and her brows furrowed even tighter. This is troublesome. The forum post opened as she spoke. The information on the wristband was split into 2 screens and projected onto the work area. The reason why Yin-Lu did this was because the things described on both sides were exactly the same. Even the words and sentences used were exactly the same. The gist of it was that Ban City's side discovered that an extremely dangerous mutant had infiltrated. The Amaterasu order was righteous and had taken the initiative to open a so-called divine nation to protect the safety of the citizens. The Ban City branch demanded that all ability users in Ban City immediately register online and report their location as well as the brief situation of the nearby ability users. They were to cooperate with the Ban City government and the SCA in conducting a comparison of social authority in order to ensure safety and so on. Big Sua's entire city. Is the Ban City branch sticking their faces under the feet of a true god? Are they willing to act like cows and horses to play with? The above words weren't said by Yin-Lu or Snake Tongue. It was the ridicule of some spectator on the forum. However, this person's words hit the nail on the head. As an ability user society branch organization without an extraordinary overseeing it, the Ban City branch had already been reduced to a vassal of the Amaterasu order over a decade ago. Normally, it was invisible. Now that it had jumped out, it was nothing more than a marionette on stage. This is, looking for Mr. Yin-Lu and Snake Tongue looked at each other once more. They both felt that trouble was imminent. The power of the Amaterasu order, coupled with the semi-official nature of the Ban City branch, really did possess something akin to a legal coercion in the inner world. It was more or less the same as, fight if you don't accept it. Even if they were cooperating, Yin-Lu could go register, but she was the only candidate who could register. It was true that Snake Tongue had an ordinary identity in Ban City, but in the end, it was just a facade. She had always hidden her true identity and notoriety. Not to mention Luo Nan, who had made his debut under the name of Mr. Mo. However, there was no such person as Mr. Mo in this world. Even though Yin-Lu had left some arrangements in D City over the past 2 days, it was enough to deal with normal situations. The people on the ship gathered together and corroborated each other. The logical clues were chaotic. To sum it up, suspects. However, wasn't this a bit of a roundabout way too big? I thought we were going to charge into geosynchronous orbit and then turn back. Isn't Mars better? Captain Jimmy walked into the main hall with large strides. He had circled back from the Quantum Corporation branch in Ban City. The private airship had just finished connecting with his flying craft. However, the sarcasm in his words was not limited to his family's itinerary. Bai Xinyan could be seen from afar standing in front of a projected area that was not yet clear. Her complexion was normal, and she was even smiling and greeting Captain Jimmy. Next to her was Yukawa Isuk. He had an unlucky expression on his face. He was sickly and dispirited. He turned a blind eye to Captain Jimmy's arrival. You're beating around the bush because you can't find him. Hee, you're still so self-confident. Captain Jimmy was still a bit confused about the new mission he had been assigned. He only knew that he was to assist the Amaterasu order in finding a powerful individual who had been in hiding for a long time. However, this did not stop him from fiercely attacking Bai Xinyan when the opportunity presented itself. This is the truth. The Amaterasu order has used methods that are close to flipping the table. From sunrise until now, they still haven't locked onto their target. Bai Xinyan carelessly brought up the Amaterasu order. It said that this is due to the surrounding area having some convoluted and distorted spacetime dimensions. Excluding natural phenomena, it's the interference of the extraordinary plane. It's a shielding interference. It's also a big problem. The one who concluded was a middle-aged man of unclear age. He did not come here in person, but rather appeared in the projection area. The most direct impression he gave others was that he was bald. His eyebrows and beard were sparse, and his skin was pale. He gave others the feeling that he didn't have enough nutrients to support the growth of his hair. He looked very thin and weak. Perhaps this had something to do with the large robe he wore. The 7th generation Dynamo Core had already recorded the data of all the extraordinaries in the world, and it was updated in real time. Captain Jimmy completed the match in the first instance. He immediately straightened his legs and puffed out his chest. Your Majesty. This bald middle-aged man was the Pope of the 100 Collections. Jimmy was still puzzled. This Majesty had just finished attacking Luo Nan, yet he came back to find trouble. Where was the logic? Captain Jimmy was not an idiot. He looked at the three people gathered before him and thought of last night's arduous training. He suddenly grasped the inner connection within. Trouble equals Luo Nan. Was this scene set up for Luo Nan? But wasn't that fellow several thousand kilometers away? Could it be that he had returned? Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, Your Majesty, do you think that there's someone behind Luo Nan? There's no need to rush to conclusions. The Pope of the 100 Collections faintly smiled. His face was sparse with hair, and his expression was amiable. The truth is that there's a strange existence in Ban City right now. He's suspected to be an extraordinary, but he's different from all the other extraordinaries on Earth. Of course, we need to investigate his background. He might not be a living person. If he's not a living person, then what is he? It's hard to estimate. The initial probing won't have any results. After all, I'm not proficient in the mental side. The Pope of the Amaterasu Order, Majesty, was the spiritual leader of millions of believers. He was the world's top mental extraordinaire. For him to say that he wasn't proficient in the mental side was truly the biggest joke in the world. The Pope still smiled amiably. You can't view the convenience of horse racing as an ability. Besides, there's no future in the mental side. Perhaps you agree. Captain Jimmy discovered that he couldn't get a word in edgewise. He was the same as Yukawa Aishuk next to him. They were completely superfluous. He only heard Bai Xinyan respond. The road ahead was paved by a character like Majesty. How could I think so much? Oh, the registration of the Ban City branch has been updated. Tell me about it. Currently, there are more than 3,400 people registered. Among them, 700 are at least awakened. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan projected another distribution map. With Ban City as the background, the map was dotted with dots of varying density. Next to him, Yukawa Aishuk's pupils dilated slightly. He secretly compared the image with the information he had. He felt that this included almost all the secret orders and supernatural organizations in Osaka. Even if it wasn't 100% accurate, it was close to 80% accurate. Not enough, the Pope said simply. The time limit isn't up yet. This is a problem of attitude. I will convey Majesty's opinion. Bai Xinyan shrugged. Next, Majesty, please arrange for your subordinates to communicate with the various orders and organizations in Ban City. The Ban City branch and the SCA will send a message to those who have records but haven't voluntarily registered. If necessary, they will visit and urge them. All work will be completed by 1:30 p.m. By that time, Ban City will have more or less been plowed, and we can begin the next phase of the operation. Captain Jimmy also stared at the distribution map and searched for relevant information. His mind was racing. After a few seconds, he suddenly spoke. Does our team also need to report? Bai Xinyan glanced at him. Her eyes were clear and calm, but in Captain Jimmy's eyes, there was a hidden meaning. He liked this, especially liked to destroy this. So, he spoke again. For the past few days, we have been neighbors with a few aptitude users. We also watch them work and discuss business. They probably aren't locals of Ban City. So far, it seems like they haven't registered yet. Chapter 862. Around 10 in the morning in Ban City, after nearly 6 hours of fermenting, the internal forum of the Ability User Association was already overflowing with noise. Once the matter was related to personal interests and dignity, the thoughts of the spectators would become a direct sense of immersion. Then it would transform into corresponding emotions. This was what was known as the will of the people. Of course, this sort of thing erased the warm and tender feelings of the so-called legal principles of social order. When it came to crossing the chasm of strength, it was mostly useless. The most obvious evidence was the progress of the registration. It was still advancing steadily, forming a densely woven net that tightened one's flesh. This sort of method completely relied on superior resources to crush them. There wasn't the slightest bit of ingenuity, yet it left people helpless. Truthfully speaking, there was always a bit of buffer space within the crushing of society's resources alone. What truly gave the ability users in Band City a sense of oppression and suffocation was the sunlight that sprinkled down to every corner of the city. The sun had already risen to the top of their heads. Its heat and penetrative power continued to rise. It didn't matter if one was outdoors or indoors. It didn't matter if one was exposed to direct sunlight or hidden in the shadows. The all-pervasive light waves could always permeate the surroundings of people. They carried the tyrannical interference imprint of the Amaterasu order. They were like demonic eyes floating in the air, radiating a gaze filled with blazing malice. Yin-Lu and Snake Tongue were on the bottom deck. For the first time, they felt resentment towards the brilliant lighting design of this area. They had already closed the light baffles of the portholes, isolating them as much as possible from the sunlight. The lights inside were also extinguished to distinguish the direction of the penetrating light. The entire living room was dusky. The only source of light was the virtual work area. Subconsciously, Yin-Lu and Snake Tongue had already stopped conversing. Their body movements grew less and less. They even stopped looking at the constantly refreshing forum messages. They each occupied a different angle, curled up their bodies, and restrained their auras. It was as if they were in a narrow and claustrophobic cage under 24-hour surveillance. They were like clay sculptures or wooden statues. They didn't know whether or not they had already been exposed. In fact, it didn't matter whether they knew or not. Right now, all responses and all pretenses would become weak and laughable in the face of the chasm that was like a heavenly moat. Frequently coming into contact with existences of that level, they had a corresponding introspection and self-awareness. Time passed little by little. Snake Tongue's state of mind went from doubt to disturbance, and then gradually returned to tranquility. His rich life experience, especially in the past half a year, had already polished a persevering and tenacious heart. She temporarily couldn't understand life and death, but as long as she could survive, no matter how difficult the situation was, it didn't seem to be more torturous than the previous 200 days. When one's heart calmed down, one's senses would naturally arise. The feeling did not originate from the stimulation of the sky barrier, but from the spiritual level. It was almost a natural disturbance, like air currents and water waves. They had existed since a long time ago, but they were too common, causing people to unconsciously overlook them. Snake Tongue even felt that this wasn't an external stimulus, but rather a subtle and mysterious connection. At this moment, all external activities were immersed in a high-risk environment, and she was under multiple constraints and restrictions. Moreover, it was not a good time to meditate and cultivate, so her attention was naturally drawn by this subtle connection. Furthermore, she also discovered that the other end of the connection, or rather, a key node, was right beside her. It was on Yin-Lu, who had also entered a state of silence. This was the so-called subtle mystery. Once the mind was biased, the connection between the two would naturally be strengthened. On the other side, the eyelids of Yin-Lu, who had her eyes closed in contemplation, twitched. She opened her eyes to a slit, and her pupils turned slightly to make contact with Snake Tongue's gaze. This allowed her to further confirm that the connection really did exist, and it was extremely sharp. Was this a type of mutual telepathy? It was more or less related to Luonan. When was it established? What was the point of safety in the current situation? The thoughts in Snake Tongue's mind couldn't help but grow, but she soon came to a realization. There was no meaning in thinking about these things because she most likely wouldn't obtain an immediate answer. It was clear that although Yin-Lu sensed it, she was in a state of astonishment. Just as both sides were probing, contacting, and researching, a telepathic thought suddenly interjected. It was unfamiliar beyond their imaginations, but it had the flavor of familiarity. It was like a drunken stupor and relaxation. A new person has entered the boss's territory. What's the situation right now? The sudden insertion of his will instantly picked up the obscure form and caused the power behind this layer of subtle connection to expand with a hum. The increase in energy level brought about a direct feeling, which was the change in luminosity. It was like a flash of light in a dark room. It flickered and died, but it was enough for people to see the outline of a scene that exceeded their expectations. Of course, this was on the mental plane. Whether it was Yin Lu or Snake Tongue, they were both shocked. In comparison, Yin Li's mental strength was a notch lower. Her habitually suppressed telepathic thought had a clear increase. It was as if a bomb had been set off in a relatively quiet space. Who is it? A pitiful person who works for some boss. Perhaps the other party felt that this explanation was too confusing, so she added, to put it nicely, I'm like a secretary or a maid. To put it bluntly, I'm like a leashed cat or dog. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm called Cat Eyes. When the other party frankly introduced herself, the latent power that had burst forth from the stimulation of their telepathic exchange returned to tranquility. It quickly settled down, just like a flash of light that had been polished and then extinguished. It was just that after settling down, the flickering embers naturally possessed a certain law. When Cat Eyes finished introducing herself, the result of the law's guidance had already changed from a quantitative change to a qualitative change. It had accumulated to a meaning of existence that could be sensed by the 3 female ability users of similar statuses. This was a relatively meticulous structure, and it possessed an extremely distinct sense of space. Cat Eyes, Snake Tongue, and Yin Lu resided on the mental plane. Their eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and all sorts of other senses, as well as their perception of the external material world, were separated by a layer. Only the mental plane, the law and order that gradually became clear, gradually appeared in a pattern that they could understand. The feeling of the flash of light in the dark room was far too vivid, so much so that the 3 of them still felt that this was a dusky room of unknown size. They maintained a relatively close distance between each other, similar to the type where they stood side by side. Due to the accumulation of changes in their perception, Snake Tongue and Yin Lu weren't able to react in time to Cat Eye's self-introduction. Only after a few seconds did Yin Lu speak, Cat Eyes? Xia City's Cat Eyes? After half a year of in-depth understanding, Yin Lu naturally knew that Cat Eyes was a member of Luo Nan's circle of friends. But for them to meet under these circumstances, it seemed that their identities weren't as simple as just friends. If it was a deeper layer, was she a forbidden zone? It had to be said that Cat Eyes' attitude gave the 3 a good start in their interaction. Under her good example, and of course within Luo Nan's domain, Snake Tongue and Yin Lu had no meaning in hiding their identities. Their self-introductions naturally came. There was a certain awkwardness in this period of time. After all, their identities and positions were more or less contradictory in the public social network of the inner world. However, Cat Eyes didn't nitpick. Whether it was Yin Lu, who came from the Blood Flame Order, who was deeply involved in the Sun Jiai intermediary case, or Yin Lu, who was once her mortal enemy, Snake Tongue, who was theoretically missing or even dead, she only clicked her tongue twice. She quickly returned to a more realistic level. You guys are all in Ban City. What are you helping him do? Work? Daily life? Warm the bed? We're just listening to Mister's arrangements. Yin Lu appropriately followed up, allowing the idle chatter to have a relatively smooth relay. Things aren't going well now that the Divine Kingdom's canopy has opened, right? That's true. Is there any news or reaction from Xia City? There's an uproar, but we're just watching the excitement. But looking at your current situation. Cat Eyes snorted twice. Everyone says that the boss fought a battle with the Amaterasu Order on the Pacific Ocean. Now that he's overcome his calamity and broken through, he's like a flying bird and a jumping fish. But if that's the case, it doesn't seem to be the case. It's a bit complicated. Yin Li's mood was indeed quite complicated. I understand your feelings, but it's the same as before. I really don't understand what in the world is going through someone's mind. His lordship's previous arrangements were always like this. Snake Tongue joined in as well. Their telepathic communication was a bit more straightforward than usual. Yeah. It's a mess. But in the end, he's always forcefully rescuing the situation, giving people the misconception that he's unfathomable. Cat Eyes was happy to introduce her experiences to these two latecomers, even though she didn't really understand the current situation. In the past, Cat Eyes often borrowed the living Starry Sky, the large production line, and other similar mental domain structures to launch a long-distance mental link with Luo Nan. But those were relatively abstract mediums. It was like facing the void, crossing unexplainable dimensions. But in the current situation, it seemed that there was a solid structure that gathered the souls of the three together. It was like, before they could make a clearer judgment, light and shadow appeared within the empty room. Moreover, it formed into a visual image that could be easily understood. The first thing that appeared was the scenery of a chaotic sky filled with clouds. They could even hear astral winds blowing past, whistling through the air. The sound and color were both present and extremely vivid. In this special stage, Cat Eyes and the other two quickly thought back to the scene from last night. Cat Eyes snorted again, "What's going on? A fortress in the clouds, a falling sun, yesterday reappearing?" Yin Luo was probably thinking the same thing. On the other hand, Snake Tongue's thoughts had an additional layer. Perhaps this was the cloud world that had trapped her for half a year. As the thoughts of the three deviated, the image that appeared changed. In the depths of the clouds, rules and laws were vaguely visible within. As the astral winds blew, the surrounding clouds dispersed. However, there were also a few strands of yarn that were entangled with the enormous creation within. Under the interaction of the two, a silhouette was gradually revealed. Oh, it really is. The scene that appeared before the eyes of the three was clearly a fortress formed from clouds. Even though the background was a vast azure sky, it still towered majestically. Especially its connection to the surrounding clouds. It was as if a cloud that covered the horizon was fluttering and fluttering. The rules were built within, causing the clouds that filled the sky to be immersed in laws even as they unfolded and flew. It was simply like a military line that could be retracted and retracted freely. In fact, it wasn't just the outer layer. The cloud fortress that served as the base of the image was also constantly changing. Every region in the depths of the condensed, seemingly substantial clump of clouds had minute changes. This was reflected in the basic silhouette. There were also slight adjustments. After looking at it for a long time, the scale of time became a bit blurry. It was as if they were appreciating the effects of a time-lapse photography. The endless flow of time and the changes of a macroscopic perspective were compressed into a scale that they could understand. The special effects are pretty good. I can't see anything deeper than that. Cat Eye's evaluation was basically the consensus of the three. From the looks of it, the image displayed was still a certain distance from the real world. It was as if the three of them were in a movie theater, watching the image displayed on an enormous screen. If one were to lower their expectations, it could be considered more realistic. But if one were to use a harsh attitude to evaluate it, there was a barrier called reality between them and the image. The boss called us over for the sake of letting everyone watch a movie and relax. It's also possible that he's teaching us live. When considering Luo Nan's temperament, as well as the fact that they couldn't relax in Ban City, Cat Eye's second half of her judgment was quite agreeable. The three of them were all observing and pondering. The large screen in front of them was playing what seemed to be a large-scale production, but it still lacked an immersive experience. It was as if the three of them were sitting in a traditional movie theater. They interacted with each other under the dusky lighting. They could only see the blurry silhouettes of each other, but they were unable to see any further details. This sort of analogical experience made it easier for them to adapt to their current environment. It allowed their communication to become smoother. Yinlu shared her new feeling. It seems like there's something else inside the cloud fortress. Where is it? There's a bloody glow in the middle. Is there? There isn't. Yinlu was very baffled. Her current mental state was also very baffled. Her mind was naturally divided into two parts. One part was communicating with people in the movie theater that was neither real nor fake, unable to see through the bewilderment barrier. The other part was stationed in the Abyss District. It was closely connected to the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, forming a transparent high-level clairvoyance. The two parts of her mind didn't conflict. They were both real and real. Gradually, she could feel the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. There existed a rather rhythmic warped undulation. This caused her mind to sway, and she was quite pleasantly surprised. It was probably because this feeling was very familiar. She would come back to it from time to time in the past half-year. According to Mrs. Halder, this was someone's usual experimental method. The foundation of the Blood Flame Order was essentially nothing more than a set of experimental products for that person. As the deputy first oblatum of the order, it was actually a bit difficult for Yin-Lu to adapt to this rhythm. But under the current circumstances, this distortion that affected the foundation of her extraordinary strength was like a gently swaying swing. It brought her along to leisurely sway. Everything was out of her control, but it was inexplicably safe and secure. "Mr." the thought appeared in the movie theater. Before it could completely take shape, Cat Eyes let out a "whoa" from the side. There really is one. The background of the image of the blue sky and white clouds suddenly had the color of blood spread out. Moreover, it appeared at the center of the mist fortress that Yin-Lu spoke of. The newly emerged elements possessed a very strong sense of space. It was as if they had entered another world through a hole in the depths of the mist. There were towering rocks and flowing bloody light. Below it was a hot lake of lava, and above it floated turbid clouds and lightning. It was malevolent and terrifying. It was similar to the demonic realm's ghost prison. Within the movie theater, one could even hear the muffled sounds of lava boiling and flowing. Yin-Li's mind finally became confused. She couldn't distinguish the relationship between the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Clear Abyss District and the image of the Blood Soul Temple in front of her. She subconsciously muttered to herself, "The Blood Soul Temple." Before Cat Eyes and Snake Tongue could react to this, a living creature with wings suddenly emerged from the chaotic cluster of clouds. It was accompanied by a long and hoarse cry as it charged out. Its shape was similar to a prehistoric pterosaur. It had a sharp beak, a thin neck, long wings, and a thick tail. Its entire body was featherless and covered in scales. The most astonishing thing was that these things were actually in groups. When the leader appeared, a dark mass of people followed behind, stacking upon each other. Amidst the clamorous cries, they spat out a large amount of acid. It was like a violent gale and a sudden shower of rain that rolled down. The cloud was wrapped in acid rain. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder roared. Amidst the crackling sounds of exploding lightning, a group of beetles resembling a black cloud appeared. It was unknown how many thousands or tens of thousands of them buzzed out. What followed was an absurd amount of meteors that were thrown down. However, halfway through, one could see that each and every one of them had their limbs bunched up. It was difficult to distinguish their stone humanoid forms as they were thrown down towards the bottomless layer of clouds, and this was just the beginning. In a few breaths of time, there were countless waves of marvelous creatures that appeared from within the cluster of clouds and lightning. Behind them, there were even man-made flying machines and large mechas rushing out. Occasionally, there would be a few illusory human figures whose faces could not be seen clearly. They either spiraled in the air, dropped down at high speeds, or attacked each other. They occupied the entire screen of the image. The three female ability users in the movie theater seemed to be watching an absurd fantasy war film. It also seemed as if they had fallen into some absurd dreamland. A more rational way of looking at it would be like someone had taken multiple shots and spliced them together into a video work. At the same time, it was presented in this large background. Not to mention the effects of the editing, just the logic of the shots was enough to make one feel despair. If one had to find a common point from this mess of images, then it would probably be this: every image of an existence manifested an extraordinary power. Moreover, every power seemed to be rather out of the ordinary. This was especially true for the few illusory human figures that pierced out from the back. Most of them were only wrapped in a single layer of armor. Some of them even wore unlined clothing and were unarmed. Yet, every movement they made pierced through the sky and collapsed the clouds. They roared through the wind and thunder. It was as if they were gods manifesting themselves. It should be said that everyone was an extraordinary. The image of cat eyes in the movie theater very naturally assumed a posture of supporting her chin with her legs crossed. Your Blood Soul Temple is actually a summoning class. That's not funny. Not to mention the two conversing, Snake Tongue was watching seriously to the side. She was dizzy from watching, but at the same time, she had some strange sensations. She seemed to be able to hear some sort of noise amidst the unbearably chaotic background noise of the fantasy war film. It was extremely muffled and rather chaotic. Most importantly, she was unable to find a corresponding scene in the movie playing. She practically believed it to be a tinnitus illusion. But where did the tinnitus come from within the framework of Luo Nan's mental domain? Once the sensation was born, it was like maggots attached to the bones. It lingered and refused to disperse. Did you hear anything? Cat Eyes suddenly changed the topic. Snake Tongue could feel that the telepathic connection between the three of them still existed. Some strong thoughts would be sensed by the other two even earlier than the modified thoughts of communication. The three of them still needed some time to get used to this sort of communication method. It was easier for them to reach a common understanding, realize sharing, and even form a resonance. Correspondingly, the feeling naturally multiplied. There was no more conversation after that, but the extra noise that was like maggots attached to the bones grew clearer. Unknowingly, the thoughts of the three sunk downwards. In this bizarre movie theater, it was tantamount to listening attentively. Buzz buzz buzz. Boom boom. The noise was mixed with director Luo Nan's special visual effects. There seemed to be a certain rhythm to it. It was quite familiar. But probably because they were quite nervous, the three of them had a mental barrier. They were unable to distinguish it for a time. In the end, it was Cat Eyes who laughed in spite of herself. She eased the atmosphere. The viewing environment of this movie theater opened by the boss isn't too good. Huh? These words were like a cold blade that had been unsealed. It streaked across the hearts of the three. There's someone else. It was very normal for there to be other people in the movie theater. But the radiance on the large screen suddenly turned intense, causing the luminosity of the entire movie theater to rise by a notch. It also opened up their field of view. And so, the three of them had a momentary feeling of confusion. They were already close to getting used to the movie theater. It was a bit inappropriate. They really were in a sealed space, and they really were watching a video. But this space was much larger than the movie theater. It was like an enormous stadium. It was stuffed to the brim. The problem was that aside from the three of them, the other people were no longer silhouettes or silhouettes. Instead, they were densely packed with turbid smoke. The smoke itself didn't seem to flow, but it really did exist. And in the deepest depths of the smoke, there seemed to be gloomy flames. They were one after another, and their boundaries could not be seen. They were like swaying soulfire. Cat Eyes, Snake Tongue, and Yinle had a mental interaction once more. Their blood ran cold. Inside the movie theater. Even if it was a movie theater, it wasn't just the three of them. There were other people. There were many, many people. They existed in an even more chaotic and fuzzy form. The additional noise seemed to be the whispers and discussions of these people. In addition, there was also clatter clatter clatter. It was unknown when, but the fine sound of trembling chains had emerged from within the turbid mist soulfire. It rang in their ears, and it was also boundlessly far away. If one were to carefully experience it, it would seem as though the chains were probing out from the depths of their souls. One end was locked, and the other end was connected. They were connected to a boundless and enormous net of chains. Every person within the movie theater, regardless of whether they were complete or incomplete, was a tiny node in this enormous net. This. Cat Eyes clearly recalled the nightmare from a few days ago. This memory was conveniently shared with the other two, and the corresponding emotions were transmitted back. Her willpower was trembling unconsciously. The structure before her eyes was becoming more and more different from the movie theater. It was to the point that a more suitable name was given: an altar. An enormous altar. An innumerable number of believers surrounded the surroundings, attentively watching the chaotic image in the center, or perhaps it could be called a miracle. They also offered their souls to the miracle. The power of the sacrifice transformed into invisible flames that resonated with the miracle on the altar. It provided energy and also refined the images, allowing the gaps to be mended and naturally transition until they became one. Within the space of the altar, there were millions and millions of souls. The chains connected, sacrificed, and smelted, forming a complete closed loop. This was no longer a movie. The vivid and lifelike images and inconceivable scenes were merely embroidery that floated on the outer layer of true power. As the power trembled, it seemed to exist in the form of a living being. As for what the deeper nature of this power was, just below the trembling embroidery, a ferocious shadow suddenly appeared. Although it was only half a body, one could already see the ugly appearance of a human face, an arachnid body, and 6 different colored pupils. The instant this demonic shadow appeared, the surroundings of the entire altar seemed to be burning with a layer of raging flames. The flames scorched the mind and scattered fear. It was as if all the destructive power within the chaotic image in the center was projected onto the plane of reality. But it was only as if. The malevolent demonic shadow arched its body halfway out when a foot stomped heavily on its back. A complete and familiar silhouette of a human stepped on the arachnid demonic shadow, appearing within the vision of the consciousness of the 3 clear-headed people. Luo Nan. The embroidery of true power trembled even more violently. It was thanks to them that the body of power, which was originally invisible and unfathomable, had vaguely transformed into an enormous cloak. It encircled Luo Nan's body, conforming to the marvelous rhythm of Luo Nan's existence as it trembled and tumbled. They could only see that Luo Nan was the core of the cloak, but they could not see where it extended to. Luo Nan created all of this. He dominated all of this. He obtained all of this. He was at the center of the cloak. He was at the center of the altar. He was at the center of the entire system. He controlled and bore the weight of all of this. Therefore, he naturally became the focal point of everything. He did not look in any direction. He was like a statue of a god worshipped in a temple, watching over everyone. Cat Eyes could feel that the other two had already assimilated into the scene. Although they had entered later, they were more receptive to this scene than she was. Perhaps this was how the Luo Nan in their hearts should be. But she thought about their first meeting a few months ago. She thought about their contact in reality and compared it to the image before her eyes. She subconsciously felt an even more intense tremble. This bit of emotional reaction was soon drowned in that damned resonance. Perhaps it was precisely because of this resonance that the rhythm of the noise that made one's scalp go numb became even more distinct. In the end, it unified into some sort of hymn. Millions and millions of people chanted in unison. Cat Eyes chanted along, but the contents of her chant were far too vague. She chanted a bit in a muddled daze. She vaguely felt that the enormous cloak was a bit closer to her. It fluttered and brushed past her face. It flooded her mind, covering her in an unknown layer. All of the distractions completely receded at this moment. Only the words of praise emerged from the bottom of her heart. They curled up like smoke as they rose unhurriedly. My heart is a prison, my heart is a furnace, my heart is a mirror, my heart is a nation. Chapter 863. Snake Tongue sank into a dream that was hard to wake up from. She was originally at the side of the enormous altar in the movie theater, resonating with the countless believers and praising the inconceivable Lord. Her soul nearly melted into it. But she didn't know when it started, but she had already entered an even more absurd space. There was no process or transition, no sufficiently convincing logic. It truly was like a dream. But this dreamland was becoming more and more real. Snake Tongue seemed to have arrived at a battlefield filled with endless cannon fire. That's right, it was a battlefield. The logic of the dream was rapidly becoming complete, giving her an incomparably deep and conclusive impression. She had sunk into the center of the chaotic war zone. She was surrounded by impregnable fortresses. Rumbling war machines could be seen everywhere. Countless soldiers, wearing exoskeleton armors, operated fighter aircrafts, shuttles, and large-scale mechas. They were currently engaged in a selfless slaughter. As for their enemies, they were extraordinary life forms similar to mutants. Many of them were once elements of the movie theater in front of her. There were also some that were simply the giant bloody apes flying back and forth in the cloud world. The battle between the two sides was so intense that Snake Tongue couldn't avoid being drawn in. She couldn't even tell who was friend and who was foe. She was only driven by some unknown power. She confronted every threatening target that appeared in her surroundings and was killed. It was that simple. Snake Tongue's strength was too mediocre in this battlefield. The most frightening thing was that she couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the war. As a Cursmancer, she wasn't used to this kind of chaotic, intense, and tornado-like killing situation. It was as if she had sunk into an enormous meat grinder. The gaps she could survive through were narrow and cramped. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause her to be crushed into meat paste. After the pain of death passed, she would be reborn in a different location on the same battlefield and once again sink into an endless battle. At first, Snake Tongue was at a loss. What was going on? What kind of logic was this? But later on, she was killed so many times that she didn't have any room to ponder. This was because even if it was a dream, the pain she felt at the moment of death was so real that it made one shiver. Beheading, piercing the heart, chopping the waist, dismembering the corpse, incinerating it, corroding it. In the meat grinder of the battlefield, the death that Snake Tongue had once abandoned her dignity and self to avoid came in different forms. There was only the strong and the weak. There was no way to avoid it. Even though the endless rebirths had partly reduced the horror between life and death, the instincts of life still made her try her best to avoid such an ending. She fought with other people and defeated the enemy, but it would not take long before she was killed again and had to experience a new way of death. Death might be like a dream, but the pain was accumulating. Perhaps when things reached an extreme, they would turn in the opposite direction. When people were too numb, they would eventually gain calmness. She didn't know how many times she'd died, but in a split second, Snake Tongue suddenly had an epiphany. At that time, when she was in a state of chaos between life and death, a beam of light pierced through her and made her whole body transparent. She shivered subconsciously. Then, what she sensed was not only the noisy and bloody battlefield, but also a pair of cold and penetrating eyes. The eye was embedded in a corner of this dreamscape. It could even be said that the entire dreamscape was the embodiment of the eye. That's right. The eyes were coldly watching her struggle for her life, displaying everything she had learned and revealing every trump card she had. They were also watching how much her flesh and skin could withstand, and how she would collapse and decay. Just like that, Snake Tongue was seen through from inside out. Snake Tongue was no longer confused. It was Luo Nan. She didn't know when it started, but all the inconceivable things she encountered were inextricably linked to Luo Nan. And as long as she had this central axis, all logic would be straightened out. Snake Tongue suddenly understood her current role. A test subject tied to the table. She didn't have any strength to fight back. She could only watch as the cold boy reached over and cut open her clothes, skin, and all her barriers and defenses. The cruel battlefield was the operating table. Luo Nan used this method to strip her, dismember her, and dissect her. He took apart every inch of her flesh, every organ, every bone, and every nerve. He tested the process of them twisting, deforming, and falling apart under different conditions. Then he reassembled and reassembled them. He even smeared oil and waxed them. He preserved and maintained them. He waited for them to recover to their original state before throwing them into a new round of experiments. This was how Snake Tongue felt. She struggled and fought within this absurd dreamland. But in the more realistic dimension, she just let Luo Nan do as he pleased. She didn't have the strength to fight back. Luo Nan used this method to understand the limits of her fleshly body, the limits of her mind, and some details that even she herself didn't know about. The sudden realization was unable to alleviate any of the pain. Instead, it made her feel even more despair because of the clarity. Snake Tongue didn't know how long this experience would last. She was going to collapse. She was really going to collapse. Even if it was a nightmare, even if she clearly knew it was a nightmare, thousands of reincarnations had already crushed the barrier of her will. Snake Tongue wanted to beg Luo Nan, but no matter how she struggled, whether it was bitter tears or mournful moans, it was all meaningless. Her cries and screams were unable to reach Luo Nan at all. In this moment, she understood the distance between an ant and a god more than any other time. In a certain sense, this made her feel even more despair than the endless pain. Later on, Snake Tongue even began to envy the soulfires that once sat side by side with her under the altar, buzzing in praise. She would rather become a chaotic and ignorant soul. She didn't have any extravagant desires, nor did she pursue the meaning of herself. She just attached herself to Luo Nan's system. She only wished to be able to escape this cruel torture and the despairing reincarnation. This thought was like a highly corrosive poison. It instantly spread, causing her mind, which was already riddled with holes, to practically lose all activity. If that was the case, if she could escape reincarnation like that, then Snake Tongue didn't mind sinking into that state at all, as long as it was the ultimate release. Northmont, Northmont. The sudden call, as well as the intense vibrations, suddenly attacked, shaking the entire dream space. It felt very violent. Snake Tongue wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, her mind was gushing with positive emotions. This was the feedback she had been begging for a long time. Finally, someone responded to her, called out to her, treated her as a normal person, a life on the same level. This scene was like someone tossing a lifeline to her when she was about to drown in deep water without a speck of light. No matter who it was, Snake Tongue would do her utmost to reach out and grab it, struggling upwards. A second later, the barrier between dreamland and reality shattered with a rumble. Snake Tongue suddenly opened her eyes. What entered her eyes was dusky darkness, followed by a chaotic burst of colorful light. Countless complex remains of the barrier were mixed within. The elements of reality and unreality were mixed together, forming an inexplicable flood of information. It crushed through the depths of her brain and heart. After no less than 5 seconds, Snake Tongue found her own logic. She was finally able to clearly distinguish the blurry silhouette of Yin Lu in front of her. In the next 3 to 5 seconds, she could feel the touch of the tatami beneath her, the structure of the wall behind her, and the sound of flowing water in the outer layer. Numerous layers of innumerable details gradually formed an incomparably solid existence in her mind and around her body. The familiar yet unfamiliar world of reality was like a sturdy escape pod. It firmly protected Snake Tongue inside, isolating her from everything in her dream. It was only at this time that Snake Tongue was able to clearly feel the situation of her body. She was completely drenched, both inside and out. Sweat soaked through her clothes, and the tatami beneath her was also soaked. She was already showing slight signs of dehydration. In the darkness, she didn't even know if she was bleeding or sweating. Her complexion was probably terrible. Otherwise, Yin Lu, who had a normal relationship with her, wouldn't reveal such a worried expression. "Are you alright?" "You." Snake Tongue originally wanted to say, "Don't tell me you didn't have that experience." Just as this thought arose, she suddenly stared blankly. What had she just experienced? Snake Tongue's memories abruptly turned chaotic. A certain dreamlike memory that caused her to feel fear and despair blurred at an astonishing speed. No matter how she tried to trace it back, she could only recall a rough layout at most. In her dream, there seemed to be a fortress where soldiers were stationed, a cloud that swallowed and spat out mutants, and a lava mountain range that was like a blood prison. They existed together, but they also conflicted with each other. Together, they constructed a chaotic world. As for herself, she seemed to be trapped inside. She had experienced a past she couldn't bear to recall. As for the concrete details of the process, she couldn't remember them. The injury that might have existed was buried deep within that chaotic dreamland world. It also sunk into the depths of her heart. No matter how she pondered over it, it was difficult for it to stir up great waves. The only thing she could be sure of was this: what had she really experienced? Oh, there was also that Yinlu probably didn't have such an experience. Jealousy involuntarily rose in Snake Tongue's heart. Yet, she still had to thank Yinlu for waking her up from that mysterious and terrifying nightmare. Her chaotic and complicated thoughts tangled together, causing her to be sluggish and dazed for a time. Of course, Yinlu could see that Snake Tongue's current state was terrible. That was rather strange. Yinlu put herself in Snake Tongue's shoes. Although the things she had experienced were shocking, they shouldn't have caused Snake Tongue to become like this. Yinlu's thoughts spun in two circles. She analyzed the situation from her own experience and suddenly thought of a possibility. Bei Shan, could it be that you were disrespectful to Mr. in that sort of situation? Disrespectful? Snake Tongue subconsciously shivered. She lost control of herself and shook her head. She wanted to speak to defend herself, but she was powerless to speak. This made Yinlu even more certain of her judgment. Yinlu had worked in secret orders all year round. She had seen quite a few similar things. It had only been a dozen or so days since Snake Tongue had become Luo Nan's disciple. Even though Luo Nan had displayed deference and obedience that left her flabbergasted, it was unknown if she was unwilling in her heart. As a believer, disrespectful thoughts were ingrained in their hearts. It was fine normally, but if they were to reveal such thoughts during the state of the Great Sacrifice, even for a sect as idealistic as the Blood Flame Order, the backlash they had to endure was rather terrifying. Needless to say, Luo Nan had already displayed the clear image of a god. As the saying goes, the gods of heaven and earth are clearly visible. They cannot be slandered. Snake Tongue was extremely intelligent. How could she have made a mistake in this matter? Looking at Snake Tongue's current situation, especially her gaze, she was in a weak and sensitive state. She had avoided the extremes of numbness and despair. She might not be in too much pain, but fear was deeply rooted in her heart. She was like a dark fire in an underground coal seam. It was silent, but it couldn't be extinguished. It was unknown how it would burn for hundreds or thousands of years. She had probably been beaten quite ruthlessly. Yinlu was inexplicably proud of herself. She felt that she should say a few words of comfort and comfort. The change in her mind was quite subtle. Her wristband vibrated at this time. She looked at the caller ID. It was Alpine Rong 3. Alpine Rong 3 had been maintaining a frequency of contact with Yinlu every 2 or 3 days for the sake of discussing business. It wasn't a big deal. However, it was hard to avoid people thinking a bit more under these circumstances. Yinlu put aside the matter of Snake Tongue for now. She pondered for a few seconds, and after another vibration, she connected the call. Alpine Rong 3's gentle voice, which was quite different from his appearance, rang out. Mrs. Yin, good day. Hello, Mr. Alpine. Is there something you need? There is indeed something. Sure enough, Alpine Rong 3 called at this time to talk about the matter of registration. With the Amaterasu order behind the scenes, the bureaucratic system of Osaka City was mobilized. The so-called registration could really be played around with. For a business entity like the Great Marsh Order that spanned the secular world and the inner world, there were many items to be filled out for registration. Not to mention the clergy of their own shrine, the employees of the association, and those with an inner world background, they had to send over a name list. Even people with recent business cooperation, as long as they were ability users, had to write a brief so that they could mutually verify. If they found it troublesome and didn't report or omitted to report, well, they might violate the relevant public security regulations. At that time, even if they had already signed a cooperation agreement, they might not be able to pass the Peace Trade Council or even the Osaka city government's investigation. Any business could be ruined. Most importantly, they would definitely offend the Amaterasu order. The registration had to be done. Alpine Rome III had called to give his greetings before the registration was submitted. He also wanted to see if there were any inconveniences on Yin Li's side so that they could both be aware of each other. Yin Li couldn't tell them if there were any inconveniences. She could only calmly express her understanding. She didn't forget to worry for Alpine Rome III. It's just that there are quite a few people in the processing plant. Do they all have to be registered? Alpine Rome III sighed a few times. A large portion of the workers employed in the factory come from the tribes of the wilderness. Many of them are infected by deformities. According to the requirements, they all have to be registered. Each and every one of them has a complicated background. It's very difficult to count them. Normally, this sort of thing would be done with everyone's eyes closed. Today, it won't be so easy to pass. After sighing and chatting idly for a while, both sides ended the call. Yin Lu immediately turned to look at Snake Tongue. Not too good. It sounds like Old Hand and the Hengduan tribe have run into some trouble. Alpine Rome III could have warned them, hinted at them, or apologized in advance. In short, they had definitely run into some trouble that was difficult to resolve. After a few minutes of buffering, Snake Tongue's spirit was a bit better. Although it was still hard to conceal her weakness, her brain could finally spin. Next door, that operation team. They've always been very interested in Old Hand and the others. As she was analyzing, Yin Li's wristband vibrated again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Through AI matching, it showed that it was the office number of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Yin Li furrowed her brows. She connected the call again, but this time, she asked despite knowing the answer. Who is this? A woman's voice rang out from the other side. There were no fluctuations in emotion. She spoke in a businesslike manner. The Blood Flame Order's Deputy First Ablatum, Madame Yin Li. This is the External Relations Office of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Oh, hello. We have here the inspection report of your entry and the signed security agreement. According to the relevant clauses, we are here to notify you of a special event. Yin Li's gaze met Snake Tongue's. She continued to play dumb. What's the matter? May I ask if you already know of the notice issued by the Saka City branch? I'm not too clear. Then please take a look at the highlighted topic on the Ability User Association's internal forum. The title is, Please follow the requirements of the notice and report as soon as possible the members of your esteemed order in Saka City, their location, and other relevant matters. All information please be submitted through the designated channels before 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Our order also has property in Saka City. We also have quite a few ability users. It's not easy to calculate. Isn't the time a bit tight? There's no room for discussion. If Madame Yin Li still doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, then please take a look at the relevant notice and immediately begin the relevant work. Huh? There seemed to be someone speaking on the other side. It paused for a few seconds before suddenly changing to a different person. It was clearly a man's voice. His throat was rough, as if he always had phlegm stuck in his throat, ready to spit out at any time. Deputy First Ablatum Yin. The other side asked despite knowing the answer. It felt like she was an extremely powerful person. Yin Li said suspiciously, You are. The administrative department and SA have sufficient evidence to prove that a portion of the restricted personnel of the peaceful trade market are suspected of making false registrations in this matter. These people maintain close contact with you. In order to clear the suspicion of your order, please immediately submit the relevant information. Yin furrowed her brows. I just said that the statistics are very difficult. The other side responded firmly, if there are difficulties, then overcome them. I'll give you an hour to submit all the information before 11 a.m., or else bear the consequences. Yin was so angry that she laughed. This group of people from the Saka City branch were all cowards in front of the Amaterasu order. How dare they put on such a show at this time? The tone on the other side became even more ruthless. Listen up, Saka City is not the Blood Flame Order's territory, and the peaceful trade market is even more so. You can do business if you want, but if you mix in sand, I'll make you regret stepping on this land. This didn't sound like the tone of the Saka City branch. It sounded more like a violent person. Yin stopped laughing. Who are you? A judge to confirm your crimes and hand them over to the flames of heaven to carry out the holy judgment. The other side directly cut off the communication. Who was this inexplicable fellow? Yin had a deep impression of that person's voice and domineering attitude. However, what left the deepest impression was still the words, flames of heaven. He's definitely not a member of the Saka City branch. He should be someone from the Amaterasu order. That's not the case. Snake Tongue said in a low voice from the corner. From his tone, he should be an important figure in the Heaven faction. He's most likely the leader, Goto Masayoshi. Goto Masayoshi. Upon receiving Snake Tongue's reminder, a certain piece of information hidden deep in the corner of Yin Li's memory was activated. Should it be said that it reverberated like thunder? Everyone knew that the true God and Pope of the Amaterasu order were admittedly famous extraordinary experts under the heavens. They also had a group of top-notch talents under them, such as Fatty Dragon, one of the 3 heroes of the secret order. But compared to the other 2 great orders, and even the majority of the famous secret orders in the world, the Amaterasu order's organizational structure and efficiency were really mediocre. Even in Saka City, the Amaterasu order didn't penetrate too deeply into the various industries of Saka City. They only cast the ominous name of the extraordinary as a shadow in the hearts of others and spread it when necessary. Under these circumstances, the large and small orders in Saka City possessed the conditions to grow unrestrainedly. This resulted in Saka City being known as the City of 10,000 Gods. Of course, everyone now knew that this was nothing more than the leek planting techniques of the true God and Pope. After one crop was cut, another crop would grow. However, it was an indisputable fact that their organization was weak. There were some matters that one couldn't just pay attention to the deterrence of the higher-ups. No matter how useful the true God and Pope's names were, they couldn't be used as calling cards under normal circumstances, right? It was precisely under these circumstances that organizations like the Heaven faction came into being. There were many such organizations on the periphery of the Amaterasu order. The composition of their members was complicated. Many of them were nomads from the wilderness or wanted criminals. They had a close relationship with the Amaterasu order, but on the surface, they didn't have any official relations. They were more like enthusiastic citizens, and so on. The Amaterasu order wouldn't acknowledge everything they did. Sometimes, they would even beat them down. However, as long as one lived in Saka City for a long time and mingled in the inner world circles, they would understand the twists and turns involved. These XX groups, XX groups, XX groups, and so on were the hired thugs raised by the Amaterasu order. They didn't even need to give them any realistic benefits or money. As long as they lent them the tiger skin of the Amaterasu order and provided a few key people with the extraordinary power of the Fuso tree great divine treasure, as well as the true meaning of cultivation, there would naturally be countless ability users who would pounce on them like flies chasing after a smell. To be able to stand out in this group of organizations, Goto Masayoshi's Heaven faction naturally had its own extraordinary aspects. Snake Tongue had a rather good understanding of this person. Goto Masayoshi is the Saka City branch's Deputy Secretary General and a director of the Equal Trade Association. It's said that he also has a position in the LRF. Yin said curiously, he doesn't seem like someone who's smooth and slick. Of course, he's more like a mad dog that can't be provoked. Currently, the leash is in the hands of the Amaterasu Order. Without a doubt, this was a vicious dog raised by the Amaterasu Order. It was a knife in the hands of the Pope and the true gods, the kind that could be thrown away at any time. Even Goto Masayoshi himself should understand this point. However, this was a guy who was deeply addicted to gambling. He used the time in the hands of the Pope and the true gods to put on enough tiger skin for himself. He also possessed the corresponding strength and status. It was this kind of guy. Once he set his mouth, he wouldn't let go until he tore his target to shreds. This kind of organization, this kind of guy, was very compatible with the current environment. They turned the absolute superiority of the Amaterasu Order in Saka City into a substantial threat that was pressed against everyone's throat. Yin-Lu could almost hear the snoring sound coming from the throat of the vicious dog. She already had a headache before they even started fighting. In such a short period of time, Yin-Lu also couldn't think of a suitable solution. At this time, an internal communication call came in. It was from Captain Kurwashi on the front deck. As Yin-Li's most capable subordinate in Saka City, this senior retired officer reported with some worry, the authority of the yacht has been cut off. If we can't get the follow-up permission from SA, the yacht can't even drive out of the passenger terminal. As an ability user, no one expected to rely on a yacht to do anything. However, this was undoubtedly a warning, and a very impolite one at that. Yin-Li's face sank. She seriously thought for a few minutes. Finally, she decided to call Ryoso Okuhira again to understand the situation. In fact, she wanted to call the veteran directly. However, the status of the two sides was still a bit unequal. No matter what happened to the veteran, if they were caught talking to each other, it would be hard to avoid suspicion that they paid more attention to the veteran, although this was the truth. Yin-Lu didn't want to provide Goto Masayoshi with a bargaining chip to threaten him. The call to Ryoso Okuhira didn't go through immediately. However, 30 seconds later, the other side sent back a video call request. Yin-Lu felt a bit strange. However, she still chose to accept it. Of course, before that, she didn't forget to turn on the lights in the living room. Mr. Okuhira. Just now, Yin-Lu forcefully swallowed back the words she wanted to say. Because in the projection screen, not only did the ugly but familiar face of Ryoso Okuhira appear, there was also a man who was almost 2 times thinner. His skin was deathly pale, like a skeleton. This guy who looked like a drug addict maintained a rather intimate distance from Ryoso Okuhira. He grinned and said, "Ms. Yin-Lu, right? Unfortunately, I caught evidence again. You secretly colluded with your business partner to confess. Don't explain. I gave you an hour. In the end, you did these meaningless things. This is disrespect to me." She didn't need to look at this face. Just by listening to the greasy throat that seemed to be filled with phlegm, Yin-Lu knew who the person in front of her was. The mad dog with many layers of tiger skin, Goto Masayoshi. The real contact, Ryoso Okuhira, expressionlessly stood at the side. He didn't give Yin-Lu any hint. Or, it could be said that his iron-like face was the most obvious hint. Goto Masayoshi grinned a bit more. "Ms. Yin-Lu, you really are a beauty. This makes my mood a lot better. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just stating the truth. Otherwise, I wouldn't even say a word more. The inspection of the factory is about to be over. After solving the matter of the day's processing factory, I will continue to communicate with you. I hope that at that time, you can give me the name list of the relevant personnel. Otherwise, I will have another explanation." Yin-Lu coldly stared at Goto Masayoshi. She had already labeled him as a scum of society in her heart. However, this guy's background was really strong. Speaking up to hear, Goto Masayoshi suddenly turned his face and looked outside the projection screen. "That lady, please wait." Ryoso Okuhira spoke for the first time. "Mr. Goto, this is the technical director of our factory." Chapter 864. The veteran held a Nyogue's rib and placed it in front of him, observing the curve of the bone after deep processing. The laser ruler of the auxiliary instrument drew one node after another on the surface of the pale yellow bone, and marked the errors down to the micron. As usual, he patrolled the workshop and acted as a quality inspector, spot-checking at any time. His standards were strict, almost harsh. This one is useless. Since it was useless, the veteran was no longer careful. He held the end of the Nyogue's rib with one hand and felt that it was quite comfortable. He exerted strength in his wrist and used the rib as a pointer, whipping the workbench. Last night, because of your crude skills, I almost lost my face in front of Mr. Mo. His design, his process, all he needs is your skills. If you can't even do this well, even if you have the face to accept work, I don't have the face to send myself there. Around him, the workshop workers were relatively stable. Most of them kept their mouths shut and kept quiet. No one said anything. However, the overall environment of the workshop was still relatively noisy. At this time, at least 5 times the normal number of people were arranged in the assembly workshop. More than half of the 100-strong laborers of the Hengduan 7 divisions were stuffed here. The other half were next door. As for the remaining old, weak, women, and children, they had another place to settle. In short, it was separated from both sides, giving people more room for imagination, but also breeding more uneasiness. They couldn't help but worry. The current situation was almost exactly the same as the so-called return of the vagrants and then being packed up and sent to Ban City. Their fate was still in the hands of others, and they didn't even know whether they would live or die in the future. In the past 10 years, they had suffered 2 similar incidents in a row. Anyone's mentality would collapse. But the more it was like this, the more the veteran had to hold on. He was the spiritual leader of this group of people. Anyone could panic, but he couldn't. He couldn't let everyone waste their energy in the quagmire of negative emotions. Therefore, he secretly clenched his teeth and put up a front. He put on a posture of not panicking in the face of danger, and everything was under control. He worked hard to let the younger generation around him come into contact with more familiar scenes and avoid the imagination combination of negative emotions. At present, the effect was limited, but he still had to bite the bullet and do it. He reprimanded his apprentices with vigor. Everyone in this workshop, go back to your workstations. Those who are not involved, move aside. Today, no matter what, 20 sets of rough materials must be delivered to me. You can't even do this kind of rough work. Why should they praise you? Perhaps it was because his words had given them some room for imagination. Someone asked, "Teacher, that Mr. Mo? Can you help us deal with this?" Old Hand's eyes widened. "What is it? What business do we have? A group of people has already come to this point, what more do you want to do?" As he spoke, he unceremoniously whipped his little disciple's shoulder with the rib whip, causing the young man's neck to twist and cry out in pain. The veteran maintained his vigorous voice and pointed at the stupid disciple who had rashly stuck out his head and scolded, "We, a bunch of people, have traveled from the Hengduan mountains to this damned place. We have been exiled for more than 3,000 miles, haven't we? Did the Star Alliance Committee give a reason? No. No reason is the biggest reason. With this reason, any crime is no longer a reason. As long as the momentum was strong enough, even if the logic was twisted, it would still have the effect of stimulating the brain." The more that the veteran spoke, the more confident he became. "As long as you don't kill people, commit arson, rob, control your lower body, and don't do those outrageous things, what are you afraid of some groundless crime? Our identity is just a stick in the hands of others, helping to beat the gongs and drums to create momentum. We just need to be stained with mud and bear some crime. We don't need to worry about lice, so what the hell is there to be afraid of? Teacher is right, stop hitting, stop hitting." The talkative disciple's neck was about to twist, but his pleas for mercy were much louder. Old Hand knew when to stop. In fact, he knew very well that these words were extreme and biased, but it was what the group of vagrant children around him were most willing to listen to. This group of young people had already gotten used to using similar methods to hypnotize and numb themselves. They were used to lying at the bottom of the sinkhole and looking up. They had already fallen to this point, so they were not afraid of falling even more. On the contrary, as long as they climbed up a little bit, it would be a great progress. The words were old-fashioned. As long as it worked, the stagnant air in the workshop finally flowed again. The people in the workshop began to move to their respective workstations, while the others stood on both sides against the walls. Seeing this situation, the veteran secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But before he could completely exhale, the side door leading to the observation passage opened, and someone staggered in. It seemed that he had been pushed, and the door behind him immediately closed. Everyone in the workshop looked in that direction. The person who was pushed in was wearing a light blue shirt and jeans, with small white shoes on her feet. She had short hair and a round face, and was dressed in plain clothes. At first glance, she looked quite scholarly, but her age was a little unclear. At this time, she was still quite calm. She just slightly tidied her collar and smiled at the dozens of people in the workshop. In her usual restraint, there was also some bitterness. Then many people shouted at the same time. "Director Jiang! Jiang Zhong, why are you here? You're the one who caused all this. You're also locked in here." There were only dozens of people, but they had two different tones when they opened their mouths. Some were concerned, some were sarcastic, especially when they heard the different tones of the people next to them. They even glared at each other. The atmosphere in the entire workshop was no longer stagnant, but it was more chaotic than before. "Why are you so noisy? Don't you think it's embarrassing enough?" The veteran forcefully swung the pointer, forcefully suppressing the crowd, and at the same time, he separated the crowd and went over there. In fact, he was a little surprised. Jiang Zhong, the technical director of the day's processing factory, the leader of Songping Laboratory, and also their closest collaborator during this period of time, appeared in front of him. Looking at his posture, it was clear that he was also locked in here. The situation was worse than they had expected. At this time, the veteran felt something. He turned his head and looked through the observation window on the outer wall of the workshop, just in time to see a few figures appear over there. Among them were Aohira and Rong San, but the most conspicuous one was the drug addict, who had previously ordered the arrest. At this moment, the thoughts in the veteran's mind changed again and again. Finally, he temporarily changed his route and strode to the observation window. The rib pointer directly hit it, and the glass window buzzed. "Aohira and Rong San, the business can't be done, and you still want to use underhanded methods? What are you planning by getting involved with this union's parasite?" If it wasn't for the glass window blocking, the rib pointer would have directly hit Aohira and Rong San's face. In fact, the veteran wanted to hit the drug addict next to him. But he didn't dare, he really didn't dare. Aohira and Rong San weren't soft-hearted, but at least they were reasonable and operated the factory according to the rules. But the drug addict next to him was willing to do anything. The veteran called him the Union Worm because he was the vice president of the Ping Trade Market Labor Union. This was the most inconspicuous title among more than 10 big and small titles. Even this didn't bring him a good reputation. The veteran also dared to call him a worm because of his identity as a union member. His heart was a little nervous, but if he didn't do this, how could he shift the focus? Goto Masayoshi didn't have any reaction to the veteran's rebuke. His skinny face maintained a faint smile. He didn't say anything and directly turned around to leave. His temper was unbelievably good. Aohira and Rong San also left. From start to finish, his face was like black iron, frighteningly gloomy, but he didn't say anything. "A rat in the gutter." The veteran spat resentfully. Of course he wasn't talking about Aohira and Rong San. He also knew that to these commoners, Goto Masayoshi wasn't a rat, but a giant crocodile. Although he was hiding in the gutter, he relied on his strong background to dig out countless benefits from the dirty water, raising his body to be fat and terrifying. At this time, the veteran actually hoped that this incident was only Aohira and Rong-san's underhanded methods. That way the situation would be simpler. But this was destined to be wishful thinking. Since Jiang Zhong walked in, the veteran knew that the situation was most likely not going to be good. Thinking of Jiang Zhong, the veteran realized that the rules in the workshop that were set up with great difficulty were messed up again. A bunch of people rushed over to Jiang Zhong and asked about the situation. Due to Jiang Zhong's subtle position in this group of people, it was very easy for some excessive words to come out, and then it would become an internal argument. Is it you guys who are up to no good? What are you guys trying to do? What are you talking about? Didn't you see Director Jiang was also locked in? Master also said that it was Aohira and Rong-san. I don't think it's that simple. It might be a plot to sow discord. You can hide a nest of cow ghosts in the hole of your brain. No matter who was arguing, Jiang Zhong didn't speak again. She only slightly lowered her head and wore a slightly nervous smile, not defending herself at all. Jiang Zhong was this kind of person. Although she was leading a research team and researching a sensitive project that exceeded scientific ethics, the way she usually behaved was just like how she was dressed right now. She couldn't get rid of the ivory tower scholarly aura. The veteran had communicated with her intermittently for a few years, so he thought that his eyes were not blurry and he understood. Those watching outside temporarily left. The veteran shook the rib whip again and came back to rescue Jiang Zhong. Is this how you work during working hours? The scene was a little chaotic after all. Someone even talked back, today is Sunday. Then a series of complaints exploded. Even if there are 3 shifts, I still have a day off today. I didn't brush my teeth or wash my face, and I was carried here. Today is Mother's Day. I don't know where my mother is. Fortunately, the prestige of the veteran was considerable. The people were just saying it to vent the shock brought about by the series of unforeseen events. After the old man waved his whip a few times, the crowd slowly dispersed. Those who should go back to their workstations went back to their workstations, and those who should squat in the corner squatted in the corner. Thank you, Master Shou. Jiang Zhong thanked the veteran for helping her out. The latter wanted to sigh but forcibly held it back. With a cold old face, he signaled Jiang Zhong to go to the supervision post with him. In the end, the hearts of the people were still wavering. Be it the people on the production line or the miscellaneous people in the corner, their gazes drifted along with them. The veteran suddenly turned his head back, and his fierce gaze finally forced everyone's thoughts back. When they finally reached a relatively quiet place, the veteran could finally sigh and let out the breath he had been holding in his chest. Master Shou, Jiang Zhong wanted to say something, but the veteran stretched out his hand and stopped him. All right, don't mention anything. I just wanted to come here to catch my breath. The veteran might have put on airs in front of a group of juniors, and he also forced himself to hold his breath. It was not easy for him to have a chance to take a breather. After another minute or two of silence, the veteran opened his mouth again and said in a hoarse voice, "They shouldn't have come for us, but we just had to be caught in the crossfire." Jiang Zhong lowered his head and said nothing. Regardless of whether it was the veteran or Jiang Zhong, both of them had some private matters that could not be exposed to the public. If it was possible, they did not want to be exposed under the spotlight. However, regardless of whether it was the small migrating tribe led by the veteran or Jiang Zhong, the technical director, they did not have the ability to struggle out of the whirlpool. They had no choice. What could they do? The veteran could not help but ponder, we are fish in the crossfire. Where is the city gate? Before he could figure out a reason, the small door leading to the observation passage opened again. This time, it was not the weak technical director who came in, but the ruthless, violent people of society. Shou Xiong, you hidden cultist, come and confront us. And this. Jiang Zhong, his name is strange. He is most likely an accomplice. Take him away too. Before the veteran and Jiang Zhong could react, 7 or 8 people had already rushed forward and surrounded them. They put on nylon ropes and dragged them away. The assembly workshop was in an uproar. At this moment, no one cared about discipline or workstations anymore. Dozens of young and strong laborers rushed forward, and it looked like a fight was about to break out. Not good. At this moment, the veteran's body was being pushed, but the sharp alarm in his head was not at all. This kind of scene was clearly aimed at intensifying the situation. At this moment, although the veteran's body was covered in the middle by the burly, violent people of society, his figure could not be seen, but a hoarse voice rose up, rough, 20 sets of rough. No matter what, make them today. If you can't make them, then you are not worthy of being the men of Hengduan Mountain. Such a scene, such words were extremely absurd, but it was this absurdity that made the hot-blooded young and strong men stunned. At this moment, the veteran struggled with all his might, but it was not to break free from the restraint. Instead, he exploded with brute force and forcefully brought 2 or 3 men beside him out of the door and into the observation passage. Right here, on the side of the thick wall that could not be seen from the workshop, dozens of armed people with electric batons and anti-riot guns were already ready to go. At the end of the observation passage, Okairu Rongzo and Goto Masayoshi both stood there. Okairu Rongzo, you despicable person, you dare to use a gun. The veteran's eyes were about to pop, and his throat was already hoarse from shouting, not only to the manipulator behind the scenes, but also to the hot-blooded young people in the workshop. The uproar in the workshop somewhat stagnated. At the other end of the passage, Okairu Rongzo was expressionless, but in his heart, he clearly knew who the veteran's burst of hatred was directed at. What a ruthless and experienced person. Goto Masayoshi praised at the side, then turned into the disinfection passage leading to the exit. Okairu Rongzo looked at the veteran again from afar, and followed behind. After a few steps, he finally could not help but say, Mr. Goto, you can withdraw your people. That's fine, maybe there are still people who can't think things through. It looked like Goto Masayoshi had made up his mind to explode a bomb for fun. Okairu Rongzo even wanted to bring out the boldness of the vanguard captain back then, and smash a fist into the back of this guy's head, but in the end he still clenched his teeth and endured, and followed up, Mr. Goto, Shuo is a vagrant, even if his faith is chaotic and out of line, it is still pardonable. As for Director Jiang, she is a high-level talent we hired, and usually only buries herself in research. Goto Masayoshi suddenly stopped, turned around, and wiped away the light and shadows of the passage on his face. Mr. Okairu, as far as I know, President Matsudaira has always been famous for being good at management. There is no one in Osaka who doesn't admire his way of management. But here, the daily management is really worrying, especially the human resources. Don't forget, I am the Vice President of the Labor Union, and a Director of the Labor Safety Inspectors Association. I have the responsibility, and also the obligation, to inquire about this matter with your side, and report the results of the inquiry to the relevant parties. So, I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer, and not this kind of meaningless argument. Okairu Rongzo took a deep breath. Mr. Goto, I am introducing the situation to you. Goto Masayoshi raised his hand to cut him off. I said, a hasty answer is not sincere. If you always have this kind of attitude, I can only interpret it as, you are trying to shirk responsibility. Even if Okairu Rongzo was a clay figurine, right now he was also provoked. His majestic body leaned forward. Mr. Goto, what on earth did you see? Can you interpret it as you first chose the frame, and then let me fill in something inside? Please pay attention. Compared to Okairu Rongzo, who was twice as big as him, Goto Masayoshi's expression didn't change. He only raised his hand again, and this time he extended his index and middle finger, turned his wrist, and pointed at his eyes. Mr. Okairu, you cannot trust me, but you have to trust my eyes. Goto Masayoshi's eyes were probably the most prominent part of his thin face. They were a bit bigger than normal people, especially on his face that was so thin it was out of shape, bulging and protruding. Even if he kept his eyelids half closed, the details of the movements of his eyeballs in his eye sockets could be clearly seen. Right now, the dim yellow pupils under his half-covered eyelids were turning, at first glance dim, but in the deepest depths, there was a dark red light. It was like the sunset at dusk, separating the horizon from the night sky. At some point, Okairu Rongzo actually felt a bit dizzy. He subconsciously averted his gaze, unwilling to meet it. Goto Masayoshi's voice pierced his ears. Remember, it won't make a mistake, the only one who will be wrong is you. Chapter 865. In the end, Old Hand and Jiang Zhong were taken away by Goto Yashitomo. Okuhiri Rongzo couldn't get away either. He was sitting in a car right now. Then Goto Yashitomo and his group went to the passenger terminal. Aside from sitting in his own car, there seemed to be no difference between him and Old Hand. President, I'm very sorry. Okuhiri Rongzo finally dialed the number. He was already prepared to bear the wrath of Matsudaira Yoshio. Okuhiri Rongzo believed that this was the correct judgment. This involved the current background of Osaka City. If he forcefully stood out at this time, it would only bring about a calamity, whether it was for himself or for the Great Zei Order. According to Goto Masayoshi's words, the Soul Cult has already been determined to be an illegal cult, and a veteran is an important contact for the Soul Cult in Ban City. And recently, Veteran has already formed an economic relationship with Jiang Zhong, cooperating to purchase the shares of a processing factory. He believes that under the premise that we clearly have a better way to make money, discussing the purchase with Veteran is suspicious of us transferring benefits. Moreover, there are so-called upper echelons of the Blood Flame Order involved in this. The Blood Flame Order is a greater suspect in the assassination of the Soul Order in Xia City. They may also be in cahoots with the Soul Order. Therefore, he wants us to confront Mr. Mo and the others of the Blood Flame Order. He even wants us to go to a location on the lake that is suspected to be a stronghold of the Soul Order. Strangely, Matsudaira Yoshio didn't get angry. He faced the troubles of the processing plant and the encounter of his close friend Jiang Zhong with inconceivable calmness. It sounded like he was more interested in Goto Yashitomo, is that so? It seems that the clues are complete. Even if his reasoning is arbitrary, it has basically achieved a closed loop. He finally found an opportunity to binge. What does the president mean? He's coming for us. While carrying out the mission, he's filling his stomach. Matsudaira Yoshio was so calm that it seemed like he was talking about other people's business. If he's going to be used as a vicious dog, his stomach needs to be hungry. If he's going to be used as a knife, he needs to be sharpened before the battle. This way, his bite will be deeper and the knife will be more ruthless. He's starving right now. If he doesn't find food, how can he prop up his skin and bones? Aohei Rong-san could more or less understand Matsudaira Yoshio's meaning, but compared to Goto Yoshio's usual methods and behavior, other than the appearance of a drug addict, there was no connection between him and hunger and torture. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Okurin Rong-san voiced out his greatest worry. If that's the case, the possibility of today's matter being reduced to a small matter doesn't exist. Unless he can find a fatter bone. Aohei Rong-san's heart sank. He more or less understood Matsudaira Yoshio's deduction. Due to the escape of the deity of the main priest, the Great Zei cult could be considered as a toothless tiger. However, they still had quite a considerable property in Ban City. If they weren't meat, then who was? Things were awkward. If the Amaterasu cult had continued with their original plan, they might have been able to gain the reputation of having foresight. But as time went by, the Amaterasu cult seemed to have completely forgotten their big plan, and their situation in Ban City became more and more difficult. During this period of time, more than one new and old force had shown malice towards them. Goto Yoshio was the biggest threat among them, and also the most evil one. It was not impossible to take over the Great Zei cult's main property in one fell swoop by the Amaterasu cult. At present, they had unknowingly walked to the edge of the cliff. Aohei Rong-san took a deep breath. President, how should we deal with it? From a practical point of view, the cult has little chance in Ban City. Even at this time, Matsudaira Yoshio's tone was still calm, almost like a pure objective analyst. The foundation of the cult has been scattered, revealing a gap. There is no reason for others to hold back, and even I will make a move. just for Goto Yoshio alone, there are still some variables. Because even if he is a vicious dog, before gnawing on a meat bone, he still has to listen to his master's words, bare his teeth. Maybe he will get a kick? Huh? While Aohei Rong-san was stunned, the speed of the car he was in slowed down. The motorcade pulled out by Goto Yoshio had already successively left the high-speed magnetic rail, entered the passenger terminal of the Ping Trade Market, and then stopped. Unable to communicate with Matsudaira Yoshio anymore, Aohei Rong-san hurriedly hung up the phone, adjusted his breathing, and opened the door to get out of the car. The car was parked by the shore of the lake. It was cloudy today, but the sunlight that shone through the gaps between the clouds still had the effect of heating up and causing dizziness. In such an environment, Aohei Rong-san felt very uncomfortable. Before him, Goto Yoshio had already gotten out of the car in front, looking at the high-class yacht berth on the pier. The pier was bustling with people coming and going, but over there, the density of the people was still 2 or 3 levels higher. The area where the yacht berth was had already become a typical scene of confrontation. On the shore, a group of people gathered. All of them were strong and well-built, dressed in black suits, and in the middle were a few people dressed in standard combat uniforms, but they did not look like good people. In the sky, there were drones buzzing. On the lake near the shore, there were 3 to 5 speedboats, roaring back and forth. Sea, land, and air attacked, and the center of focus was the yacht on the shore. As for the yacht, near the shore, more than 10 strong sailors stood in a row, their backs against the almost 10-meter-high hull, and their momentum was not inferior. This scene seemed to be rounding up some criminal, but it seemed to make sense to change the position. Aohei Rong-san, of course, knew the background of both sides. Not to mention the group of people on the shore, some of the important figures in the Heavenly Council still had a lot of opportunities to show their faces in the peaceful trade market and even in Ban City. As for the yacht that was stuck in the berth, it was sold from his hands to the Blood Flame Order 2 weeks ago, in exchange for some working capital. Now, even the name on the paint on the side of the yacht had not changed. Goto Yoshio's eyelids drooped, half covering his protruding eyes, and sighed with emotion. People now are not like in the past, they all have to hit their heads and bleed before admitting to their debts. Aohei Rong-san really wanted to tell him that if people in this world were like meat and bones, then what was the meaning of the Heavenly Council? Thinking about this, Goto Yoshio understood this logic better than anyone, so he just sighed with emotion and waited for someone. Goto Yoshio? A somewhat stiff tone sounded from the side of the parking space. A dark-faced man in a standard combat suit strode over. Compared to the violent people in the distant confrontation area, he had the same sturdy physique and the same combat suit. When this man wore it, he looked quite formal, but no one knew where he came from. Goto Yoshio did not get angry because of the other party's impolite way of addressing him. Instead, the smile on his thin face became clearer. Captain Jimmy? The black-faced man smirked towards the standoff area. You did this? When I flew back, I thought we could start the war, but it turned out to be this kind of scene. The police, SCA, and even the Ban City branch could all go. Why did you let these unruly guys come? No, we first need to observe. Facing this rather arrogant captain, Goto Yoshio was still neither hurried nor slow, only opening his mouth and laughing. My mission is to observe, and observation requires different situations and conditions. If both sides are law-abiding citizens, and everything is done according to the rules, what's the meaning? Oh, that's a good reason. Captain Jimmy could see that Goto Yoshio was purposely trying to intensify the situation. This was in line with his expectations, but he still made some minor corrections. He directly reached out and, without any regard for himself, grabbed Goto Yoshio's shoulder, and pushed this observer forward. What you need is to observe up close. Goto Yoshio did not resist, only the corner of his mouth twitched. Yes, if I want to upgrade, I need you guys to do it. Believe me, I can't wait. An evil dog that had not eaten its fill, a sharp knife that already couldn't wait. In the eyes of Okuni Rong 3, Goto Yoshio and this Captain Jimmy both had corresponding roles, and the relationship between them was rather subtle. There was a difference in their levels, and also differences in their functions, but fundamentally, they were both tools, there was no essential difference. Of course, even if they were to use tools, hand-eye coordination was also necessary, they still had to communicate with each other. Goto Yoshio asked again, although it might not be used, in terms of evidence, I'll let D-City's side cooperate, we can also directly confront them. So obedient? People die for wealth, birds die for food. We're the best at this point. Why don't we arrange it now? It's good to communicate in advance. At this moment, Goto Yoshio's subordinates had already brought over veterans, Jiang Zhong, and other key figures of the so-called chain of evidence. He set off first, a group of 10 or so people walked along the wooden walkway by the lake towards the confrontation scene. Captain Jimmy did what he said, and while walking, he made a call, how's the preparation going? Let Cadman answer the phone. Speaking of which, the speed of changing people over there was a bit slow, Captain Jimmy didn't speak for a long time. Okuni Rong 3 finally felt that something was wrong, and turned his head to look, only to see that Captain Jimmy's face was dark, and his eyes turned back from the empty state of long-distance communication, focusing on one point. At the point of focus, which was the shore of the lake they were about to pass by, sat a person on a thick short metal pillar that was part of the fence. That person didn't have too many characteristics that could be remembered. If one were to forcefully describe it, it would probably be a particularly leisurely body language. He was wearing casual clothes, his legs were naturally spread apart, his head was raised towards the sky, and his mouth kept opening and closing, looking like he was neurotically talking to himself. Of course, it could also be that he was chatting with someone through the built-in communication device. This was a very normal scene, placed in the passenger terminal with people coming and going, there was nothing out of place. But now, in front of the yacht not far away, there was a tense confrontation atmosphere, separated by less than 30 meters, this gentleman's performance seemed somewhat out of place. Captain Jimmy's reaction didn't need to be said, the moment he saw this person, Okuni Rong 3 was somewhat unable to lift his feet. Goto Yoshio, who was beside him, even slowed down his steps earlier than him. The dim yellow eyeballs in the eye sockets had a clear shift, bringing along that withered head, completing a shift of attention. But no matter how they reacted, the distance between them and that person was quite close. It must be because the place where they parked was too close. Due to the close distance, they could clearly hear that person's talking to himself, Mother's Day, that's right, big sis you're so smart, I definitely won't get involved. You're smart, but I'm not stupid, we've never done this kind of foreign festival, most likely someone leaked the information, so you came over to denounce us. Ha, you finally enjoyed a few days of peace, just obediently go into seclusion, when you come out of seclusion you'll go on a rampage and shock the world. Strange? What's strange about it? I've always talked like this, don't worry, my position here is different from the past, naturally there will be people to serve me, it's more comfortable than at home. Yes, I won't get carried away and purposely cause trouble for my family. If it's your turn to deal with matters, this world is more or less a step away from destruction, haha, just a joke, just a joke. That man used a normal speed to chat and laugh, but it made Goto Yoshio's group unconsciously slow down their steps. In the end they were still unable to maintain their natural posture, one after another they stopped, standing at a position approximately 7 to 8 steps away from the man, staring over there without looking away. About 20 seconds later, that man finally ended the chat, smiling as he hung up the communication. And also at this time, he seemed to have finally discovered the abnormal attention over here, slightly turning his face, he also cast his gaze over, meeting face to face with this side. Aohei Rong-san had long recognized who it was, subconsciously wanting to greet him, but for some reason, the words were stuck at the tip of his tongue. It was close to noon, due to the thick layer of fish scale clouds in the sky. Even if the sunlight passed through, it was not considered hot, especially with the slightly moist air from the lake surface, under the pressure difference between the land and water, it could be considered to be very comfortable. But at this moment, the gentle breeze that brushed against their faces had clearly turned into a layer of invisible and heavy curtain. Perhaps it was even soaked with water, as it blew over and fiercely pasted on their faces, sealing their mouths, noses, and even their orifices. Even their pores were sealed, isolating them from the inside and outside. For a moment, they actually felt as if they were suffocating, spreading from their brains and hearts. For a moment, the group of people's mouths and noses were interrupted. As for the rest, nothing happened after that, only the gentle breeze, with the water vapor on the Beishan Lake, neutralizing the heat of the noon sun, fresh and pleasant. At this time, the veteran, who was caught in the crowd, finally saw the person on the shore of the lake. For a moment, he still couldn't believe it, but that person turned his gaze, smiled slightly, and greeted him. Master Shou. In the heart of the veteran, the emotions of hesitation and surprise pushed back and forth. A voice came up to his throat, and he blurted out, "Mo. Mr. Mo." The man smiled again. "Those things I want, I hope they don't delay the work." In the factory, they are still working. The veteran clearly knew that the atmosphere at the moment was delicate and tense, like a pile of gunpowder that was constantly being compacted and could explode at any time. But his sharp temper, which had been honed in the wilderness for decades, also came out at this time. "We don't have anything that's fake. It's all hammered out, so it's definitely real." "That's good, I'm counting on it." Chatting with the veteran, as if there was no one else around, under the gaze of many people, Mr. Mo's gaze again turned to Jiang Zhong in the crowd, stopped for a few seconds, then lowered his head again, and beat his thigh, as if to get rid of the invisible fatigue. Also at this time, there was a sudden commotion at the confrontation scene not far away. Over there, the densely packed group of violent people suddenly opened a gap, as if someone came out. But in the end, what passed through the gap of the crowd was only an empty electric wheelchair. From the analysis of the gradually approaching noise, the electric motor of the wheelchair seemed to be not working, only God knows where it came from. Along the way, the aggressive members of the Heavenly Council looked at this thing pass by like idiots, and not a single one of them reached out to stop it. A few seconds later, the electric wheelchair that had already lost half of its functions obediently stopped next to Mr. Mo. The latter slowly stood up, leisurely moved up, and then adjusted his sitting position before letting out a long breath. His gaze moved to Goto Masayoshi's face, and met with his dim yellow pupils. The swelling of Goto Masayoshi's eyeballs was even more obvious. The pupils did not move, but there were layers of dark light, intersecting and blending in the depths. Mr. Mo blinked, and praised, "Your eyes are not bad. I feel that they are even better than mine." That tone of voice was like meeting an acquaintance on the road, asking where he bought the sharp goods on him, and how much it cost. And also while speaking, in front of Mr. Mo's left eye, a monocle appeared out of thin air, floating in front of the eye socket, reflecting the sunlight, covering half of the pupil's color. Chapter 866. When Mr. Mo started to greet his acquaintances, Captain Jimmy moved back and let Goto Masayoshi stand at the forefront. He himself issued a series of orders through the deep blue platform. Over at Ban City, a few orders were quickly executed, but the communication that had been made thousands of kilometers away still hadn't reached the most important person. Captain Jimmy was a little annoyed. "You're still giving the witness lunch time?" Over at T-City, Hood, who was also a captain, laughed. "Sorry, he's a greedy hyena. Once he smells blood and flesh, he always wants to take a few more bites. This is his old nest, and he always forms groups. How annoying. Now that the negotiation of the agreement is coming to an end, we want to wait for him to sign before connecting the call to prevent new situations." "Sign, huh? Do we need to find a lawyer for him?" "Prepare yourself, and there are 2 of them. The other ability user associations and veterans associations have about a squad of witnesses. You said you wanted to make it an ironclad case." Jimmy was speechless. He admitted that he had originally set up this line to cause trouble for the nominal supervisor, Bai Xinyan, so he had taken a more righteous path. But now the situation had changed. "Listen, Hood, don't talk nonsense now. I just want to know how long it will take to sign. Be more precise." "Oh, let me calculate. Probably, soon." If he talks as much nonsense as you when testifying, I swear I'll slit his throat. I can do it for you. I've had enough of him these few days anyway. The two captains reached an agreement from thousands of kilometers away. Captain Jimmy then passed the information to Goto Masayoshi through the preset channel. The latter didn't respond, as if he was focusing all his energy on communicating with Mr. Emo. Goto Masayoshi's eyes were still locked with Mr. Mo's monocle. The thin skin on his skeletal face trembled slightly as he maintained his chatting posture. Your monocle is also not bad. It's formed directly from water molecules, right? As far as I know, the only thing in the world that can directly form molecular structures is the dripping sword. To be precise, it's the condensation ring. The secret skill that Her Majesty Empress Wu released in the headquarters RT-8313 Mission Attachment 2 is indeed the dripping sword, but there are 6 basic structures hidden in it. The only one that truly has the effect of mobilizing water molecules is the condensation ring, which is also the most valuable one. The topic suddenly changed. Regarding this, the different observers at the northern mountain lake and even further away all had their own judgments. Mr. Emo? The inner world has never heard of any Mr. Emo. On the private airship, an efficient monitoring system was transmitting the situation of the lakeside to them at the same time. There were only a few spectators, but they were all very important. After returning to Osaka, the sickly Tamagawa Aishook unconsciously straightened his back. He was very interested in this character. Of course, part of the reason he had suddenly roused his spirits was that the Pope had already cut off communications and had not yet suppressed him. The condensation ring, Mr. Mo, the connection between these two isn't clear. He looks like a good teacher. Tamagawa Aishook stared at the monitor screen, watching the two people discussing the condensation ring. The more he listened, the weirder he felt. 10 seconds later, he shifted his gaze to Bai Xinyan's face. Who is he talking to? Bai Xinyan sat on the armrest of the sofa and tilted her head to look at the private projection area. It was showing a conference room in T-City, thousands of kilometers away. She and Tamagawa Aishook were looking in a completely different direction, so it took her 5 seconds to respond. Go to Yoshi, to a certain extent. That should be the right way to put it. I'm talking about just now. That old man, you have information on him. Shoshung, nicknamed Old Hand, the one he was talking to himself. Tamagawa Aishook's face turned green, and his voice became sharper. Bai Xinyan spread out her hands. How can I guess that? Tamagawa Aishook quickly controlled his emotions. His eyes became sharper, and there was even suspicion in them. Don't you have any ideas? You can tell me if you have any ideas. Bai Xinyan pushed the question back. Tamagawa Aishook stared at Bai Xinyan. He cracked a smile, but his teeth were still clenched. There are only 2 ideas. One is to find a woman who is qualified to be his sister, in the blood flame order according to the character setting of this Mr. Mo. Aha. Bai Xinyan responded casually, but her gaze was still on the private projection area. In the conference room in T-City, the 2 rows of negotiators had already started shaking hands, as if they were having a formal business negotiation. Actually, there was no difference. Tamagawa Aishook's face turned red again, and he unconsciously raised his voice. The other one is to expand the scope a little, and search for people that we know and don't know, people who have a sister in the inner world. Oh, that's a lot more troublesome. It's just a screening condition. Tamagawa Aishook's fingers twitched, as if he was really going to give the order. His eyes were still glued to Bai Xinyan's face, and he continued to ask, it would be best if the 2 directions work together, but if there is only one condition, which one will you choose? Bai Xinyan looked back and smiled. Of course I choose the most reliable one. You. Bai Xinyan continued to smile. Right now, we can't avoid making guesses, but our guesses are all inconclusive. Why don't we continue looking? As she spoke, she moved her hand, and the private projection area was placed in the main projection area of the room, side by side with the surveillance footage of the North Mountain Lake. Look, although the two sides are still minding their own business at the moment, at a deeper level, there are already undercurrents flowing, and we're just waiting to break that information barrier. Aren't you curious about what will happen then? Tamagawa Aishuk was very annoyed by Sinyen's beating around the bush. What's the point of finding a witness to identify him? Whether the identity of Mr. Mo is real or not, whether his relationship with the Blood Flame Order is shallow or deep, who cares? Even if the connection at T-City is successful, and the identification is successful, do you really expect him to just stand there and let us capture him? Instead of playing this kind of detective game, why don't you let your team of subordinates directly take action, and Goto Masayoshi will be able to see more things. Captain Jimmy needs a key to open his own weapon box, and always stand on the side of morality. This is a rare quality for frontline personnel. Bai Xinyan seemed to be completely unaware of the twists and turns of the plot. She displayed the bearing of a superior, but quickly changed the topic. Mr. Yuchuan, is it really okay for you to make your contempt for the Blood Flame Order so obvious? Tamagawa Aishuk sneered. Stray dogs, rootless duckweed, even if I want to pay attention to them, it depends on whether they can handle it. Bai Xinyan was not in the position to defend the Blood Flame Order, she only shrugged. We still have to respect the judgment of the frontline personnel. Even if there really is a problem, this is not an intercontinental airship, and the distance is so close. Are you afraid that we won't be able to react in time? Tamagawa Aishuk's slightly flushed face was now whitened, and his straight back collapsed. The scene fell into a deadlock, awkwardness, and some kind of doubt that was not fully displayed. Under such an atmosphere, there was finally a change at the passenger terminal. Goto Masayoshi broke away from the strange state of looking at the monocle and chatting around the condensation ring, and entered the main topic. Mr. Mo of the Blood Flame Order, you can call me that. What's your full name? Position in the Blood Flame Order? Goto Masayoshi gradually increased the pressure, also closely watching the reaction of Mr. Mo. Relying on the special structure of his eyes, he was equivalent to a human-shaped lie detector, able to monitor the breathing, pulse, skin moisture, and so on of the target in detail, but Mr. Mo's cooperation was obviously not enough. This is an interrogation. If you can't find a more suitable term, you can temporarily say it like this. I think it still has the corresponding qualifications. As he spoke, Goto Masayoshi reached into his pocket and took out a vintage leather wallet, from which he took out a beautifully designed business card. There are a lot of titles on it, but there is a higher probability of finding a position corresponding to the interrogation from it. Sakura Officials, Ability User Association, or something else. These are all fields that I am good at. Mr. Mo didn't intend to take it. He just narrowed his eyes and slightly raised his head to look at the still dazzling edge of light in the gaps of the thick fish-scale clouds. Mr. Mo. I think no matter how dazzling your titles are, they can't compare to today's sun. I don't like this weather, and I don't like you either. Only this pair of eyes is a little more interesting. Goto Masayoshi was stunned for half a second, then laughed out loud. No matter how he laughed, the surrounding atmosphere quickly turned cold and stiff. At this time, Captain Jimmy, who was already half hidden behind him, coughed lightly, giving a signal of everything is ready. Some things are not up to people. Goto Masayoshi's interesting, dim yellow eyes locked onto Mr. Mo's face, and between the gaps of his lips and teeth, he chewed out syllables that sounded like ice. As he spoke, he shook his wrist, his fingertips drawing across the faces of Jiang Zhong, Okuni Rong, and finally falling on the side of the veteran. This person, he's under my protection. If there's anything, you can't go wrong by looking for me. Goto Masayoshi choked, and the wrinkled skin at the corner of his mouth trembled. He wanted to laugh, but felt that it was exceptionally strange. He subconsciously glanced back at the veteran, only to see that the latter also had a confused expression, as if he had even forgotten to be touched. A frank answer. Although it was somewhat unexpected, Goto Masayoshi still quickly calmed himself down. His dim yellow eyeballs slightly shifted in his eye sockets, focusing on Mr. Mo's face again. Then, you're admitting your connection with the soul cult? Mr. Mo sighed. So. So, you admit that the Blood Flame Order and the Soul Order are colluding, damn you. This is the most despicable slander. A shout suddenly sounded on the dock. A thick Western accent, as well as the environmental sound that seemed to be slamming the table, seemed out of place in the lakeside dock. On the dock, most of the people were shocked by this voice. Shifting their gazes towards the direction of the voice, what they saw was a rippling halo. This was the projection area. In order to have a good effect on a sunny day, they had even done some processing, so that the colors of the people and the background inside were more or less distorted, but the clarity was still above the standard. Everyone could tell that what was shown in the projection area was a conference room. There were about 10 people inside, divided into 2 groups, sitting face to face across the long table. There were all kinds of hair colors, eye colors, skin colors, and all kinds of skin. Their body language was uniformly relaxed. There was only one person who had just stood up from the main seat of the conference table. His expression was sullen, and he even waved his arm, to the point that the corner of his suit was lifted. It felt like he was walking with the wind as he walked towards the direction of the camera. Hasty judgment, ridiculous accusation. You guys made a long-distance connection just to let me see this? The angry man's camera sense was very good. The position where he stopped it was just right, giving the audience here a sense of oppression, but also not causing his face and figure to change. Speaking of which, he had a great figure. Wearing a casual suit, matching with his deep and upright face, as well as his slightly slovenly brown beard, he had the air of a celebrity, a person who could easily leave a deep impression on others. Being scolded by such a person, Goto Masayoshi's tolerance seemed to have increased. His expression didn't change at all, his gaze still fixed on Mr. Mo's face, not even blinking. On the other hand, Mr. Mo was a little curious about the newly appeared projection character. Shifting his gaze, he turned around in the projection area, and also made eye contact with the angry man opposite him. The angry man made an immediate reaction. His body slightly leaned forward, further increasing the pressure. The reputation of the Blood Flame Order cannot be controlled by some shameful smelly bug. Who are you? Mr. Mo asked curiously. What? The other side was obviously stunned for a moment. The instantaneous reaction caused many cracks to appear on his angry expression, which was then drowned by a smile caused by absurdity. You don't know me. Mr. Mo leaned back on his wheelchair, slightly tilting his head and curling his lips. His posture was actually a little childlike naivety. Even if he didn't say anything, he didn't hide his true thoughts at all. Should I know you? The angry man completely broke down. He laughed out loud, half turning around, his right hand hitting his chest, displaying an inconceivable emotion to the others in the conference room. See, he said he doesn't know me. At least half of the people in the conference room laughed out loud, while the other half didn't know whether to laugh or cry, as if they were watching a ridiculous play. Gathering the cognitive resonance of the entire conference room, the angry man turned around again, his deep eye sockets and grayish-green pupils filled with a joyful emotion. I don't know how to address you. But there's one thing, since you don't know me, then in the Blood Flame Order. Cadman, don't be rude. A sharp voice cut across, forcefully interrupting the speech over there. And just on the path that the electric wheelchair had just passed through, Inlu, dressed in a professional suit, passed through the crowd and quickly approached. Oh. Ever since the remote projection appeared, Goto Masayoshi, who had entered the mode of watching a show, suddenly felt his blood vessels twitch as he watched Inlu receive the treatment that the electric wheelchair had previously received. The heavenly citizens, that had gathered at the pier, tens of over 100 violent people, stood in a dense mass, each of them glaring fiercely, but didn't do anything. This wasn't right. Goto Masayoshi had never restrained his subordinates, and his heavenly citizens weren't righteous people who didn't offend anyone, but a nest of violent scum who wished for the whole world to be in chaos. Then, what the hell was this welcome twice in a row? Goto Masayoshi pursed his lips, his dim yellow pupils shifting in his eye sockets. His line of sight moved from far to near, sweeping past several key positions at the pier, passing by Yin Lu, pausing for a moment, and finally landing on Mr. Mo's face again. "Sir, are you okay?" Yin Lu finally arrived at the most tense area. She had seen the changes at the pier from the boat, so she rushed over as fast as she could. Before getting off the boat, her main targets were the drug addict Goto Masayoshi, and Captain Jimmy, who had retreated to the back. The two of them appearing at the same time proved that the two groups of people who had enmity with each other in Band City had already merged. She thought that this was already the end of the challenge. But she didn't expect that halfway through, a new variable that shouldn't have appeared. D-City, which was supposed to be the rear, actually stabbed them through the air. To Yin Lu, who was temporarily in charge of teaching affairs during Mrs. Halder's seclusion, this was an unforgivable mistake. Especially after that unthinkable experience. Yin Lu came here with a poisonous fire burning in her heart. On the way, she even ignored the omnipresent sunlight and the spiritual pressure that followed her like a shadow. As for the violent people at the pier, they really didn't count for much. Mr. Mo didn't comment on her arrival. This made Yin Lu feel increasingly uneasy, but she couldn't allow her impatience to destroy her demeanor. Otherwise, she would only lose face for her boss. She could only use the opportunity of bowing to Mr. Mo to regulate her breathing and consciously stand behind the wheelchair. She lightly grasped the handles on both sides of the wheelchair and confirmed her position. Only then did her line of sight turn towards the projection area on the pier, towards the familiar person who was thousands of miles away. "Cadman, in front of Mr. Mo, you're too presumptuous." Cadman's full beard and snow-white teeth formed a brilliant smile. "Mr. Mo, is it the Mr. Mo who doesn't know me, and I don't know him?" At this moment, Goto Masayoshi should have been the one to speak up and cooperate, but for some reason, he was staring at Mr. Mo in a daze. Captain Jimmy, who was at the back, saw that his reminder was futile, so he rolled his eyes and went up himself. Cadman, as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order, doesn't know Mr. Mo, who claims to be a member of the Blood Flame Order, and the Order's deputy high priestess holds a completely contradictory position. What does this mean? Yin Lu was expressionless, but the flames in her eyes seemed to want to penetrate the projection and burn D-City, which was half the Pacific Ocean away. As a deputy high priestess, Goto Masayoshi's hoarse voice cut in at a timely moment. "Deputy High Priestess Yin, at a time like this, the hierarchy within the Blood Flame Order is at most a part of the evidence. It's definitely not suitable as a tool to refute the evidence. Speaking of which, Mr. Cadman has already voluntarily signed the relevant witness agreement, and the legal department, along with the D-City Ability User Association, the Veterans Association, the Mercenary Service Club, and other experienced third parties, have done the notarization. In terms of the priority of legally admissible evidence, Mr. Cadman has already surpassed you. It complements his status as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order." This was a premeditated encirclement. Yin Lu felt even worse. If it was possible, she would have pressed Cadman into the lava lake at the bottom of the Blood Soul Temple, rolled him over 100 times, cooked him, and exploded him to vent her anger. But now, the space of thousands of miles had erased all possible weapons, leaving only the least lethal words, "high-ranking." Mr. Mo's low voice sounded like he was talking to himself, but it also carried a tone of doubt. Captain Jimmy defended his statement first. "There are only 9 members of the Order's Council in the entire Blood Flame Order. Of course, they're the high-ranking members." Cadman cooperatively bowed and revealed a reserved smile. At the dock, Mr. Mo shook his head slightly. "My energy is limited, so I'm not too clear about the Blood Flame Order's current governance structure. I only know that the Order has 127 fanatics and 1540 devout believers, and 127,000 shallow believers. You're not one of them." Without waiting for the others to respond, he tilted his head back slightly, as if he was talking to Yin Lu, but also as if he was sighing with emotion. "As an order, the number of devout believers and fanatics is, to be honest, a little low. It's not enough to support the Blood Soul Temple's full operation. Is it because of the ideology church?" Yin Lu, Cadman stared blankly for a second, before revealing a brilliant smile like that of a star. Mr. Mo, are you going to deny Madame Halder and Madame Ian Lee's authority over the selection and appointment of the Order's believers? You should know that I greatly respect the Order's trust in me, and I have a good collection of the appointment letters and authorization certificates they've issued. There's also more concrete evidence. Cadman stretched out his hand. Beneath his bronze-colored skin, there was a layer of dark blood-colored light flowing. The air around his arm seemed to have been scorched by a high temperature, forming obvious distortions. However, the shirt and suit sleeves above his wrist showed no signs of being charred or burning. Violent Flame Seal. This was one of the Blood Flame Order's high-end physical techniques. For someone like Cadman to be able to execute it without needing to adjust his chi gathering, it was already a high level of proficiency. His combat power was definitely at B rank. Most importantly, using a physical technique to form a supernatural power close to flames would definitely require a powerful interference power. As a fleshly ability user, Cadman could only rely on the Blood Soul Temple to achieve this effect. I can call upon the power of blood and fire at any time. I've always believed this to be the acknowledgement of the Blood Flame will. But now, Mr. Mo, are you going to deny all of this? Cadman found the feeling of anger in the time it took to say a few words. He used a brilliant expression to smoothly transform it. Vice Mean, could it be that you aren't going to give your devout believers a doctrinal explanation? Ian Lu didn't respond. Mr. Mo scratched his chin. Oh. In this sort of situation, even if we eliminate the factors of philosophy and methods, the Blood Soul Temple system does indeed have some unreasonable areas. Cadman nearly couldn't keep a straight face. The way you speak doesn't sound like someone from our primordial sect. It sounds a bit like the restraining faction. The so-called restraining faction was the branch of the Blood Flame Order that Tian Bang, who was known as the #1 person below the Transcendent, belonged to. It was this military powerhouse and his influence that had chased Madame Halder's group from Xia City to T City. Cadman's words were filled with malice and sarcasm. Unfortunately, Mr. Mo was completely indifferent to this. The doctrines of the Blood Flame Order are actually quite mediocre. It's better to refer to the real thing and study it seriously. It's not too convenient for me to go over right now. How about you come over? Someone in the conference room of T City let out a muffled laugh. The situation was slipping to an even more absurd level. Cadman spread his hands. He was already at a loss for words when it came to this Mr. Mo, who was sometimes mysterious and sometimes crazy. That's a really good suggestion. I think I have enough time to consider it. His arms spread out and swung along with the movement of his limbs, bringing with it a scorching hot wind. The power of the explosive flame seal still affected the surrounding area. Huh. Cadman subconsciously swung his hands again. The dark bloody light was disturbed by the airflow. It was like a flame had been blown up from a half-extinguished pile of embers. The light suddenly brightened. There really was a flame. A bloody flame burned. Cadman's expression changed. Chapter 867. The others in the conference room could not see Cadman's face. Most of them were still immersed in the joyous atmosphere caused by the absurdity. However, there were still some people like Hood, who was not part of the negotiation. Hence, he did not sit at the side of the table. Instead, he followed his professional habits and stood in the corner of the conference room, approximately to the right behind Cadman. At that moment, he saw Cadman extend his right hand to the side of his body and fling it continuously in an unnatural manner. Under such circumstances, the sudden bright color of the flame became exceptionally strange. As a normal person, there would always be a period of adaptation to changing from one mental state to another that was contrary to that mental state. Hood hesitated for 2 seconds. Finally, he walked forward quickly to ask about the situation. However, when he was just 1 step away, Cadman's fling movement suddenly became 10 times more intense. It was like an intense punch. Hood's sensitivity was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He made the most accurate response. Relying purely on the strength of his waist and abdomen, he bent his upper body backward and slid his feet at the same time. The fist wrapped in blood-red flames was almost swung at his chin. Hood could even hear the sound of the air being burned, as well as some indistinct and chaotic noises mixed in. Cries of surprise rang in the conference room. There was also the sound of tables and chairs scraping against the floor. Some people stood up, while others froze on the spot. However, they were all clearly frightened. The joyous atmosphere from before collapsed in an instant. In the next second, Hood pulled away from Cadman and shouted sternly. "Cadman!" Cadman did not respond. After throwing that punch, he seemed to have lost control of his body. He staggered a step and turned his body sideways. His left hand moved horizontally and pressed down on his right shoulder. This was his most instinctive reaction. At that moment, the blood-red flames that were blowing on his right hand had already broken through the boundary of his wrist. They were rapidly spreading towards his arm and even closer to his torso. The strange thing was that the flames had clearly scorched the air and even raised the surrounding temperature. However, the surface of Cadman's body was still relatively intact. It was only soaked in a thick dark red color. Even the clothes on his arm were not damaged at all. Instead, it made his face look even paler. In such a situation, it was impossible to tell what was real and what was fake. It was as if some inherent nature had been distorted by some kind of power. "What did you do?" The sudden change in the conference room was clearly transmitted to the passenger terminal through the remote video. Goto Masayoshi's muffled voice rang out. There wasn't much righteous indignation from being bound together against a common enemy, but more of surprise, as well as a strange sense of excitement. Goto Masayoshi kept staring at Mr. Emo. In the shortest amount of time, to gather enough useful information was his mission, even his destiny. Therefore, to him, he wasn't afraid of Mr. Emo making a move. The state that he was in earlier was the most unacceptable. But even if he made a move, it didn't feel any different. After the previous round of observation, Goto Masayoshi had already faintly noticed that Mr. Emo seemed to be wearing a thick and heavy cloak at all times. Of course, this was only a description of Mr. Mo's marvelous pattern of concealing the operation of his extraordinary power, or perhaps this pattern itself was the external representation of the operation of his extraordinary power. Goto Masayoshi judged that Mr. Mo's core secrets were all hidden under this cloak. This thing was so thick and wide, airtight, hiding everything tightly. Even if a corner was occasionally lifted up, what could be seen would be chaotic and blurry, without any discernible silhouette. Under this kind of situation, no one knew whether Mr. Emo under the cloak was naked, or wearing armor, or perhaps inside was simply an arsenal that defied normal spacetime logic. That's right. It was this cloak that formed a kind of black box sealed with special rules, isolating the outside world from prying. What was shown was merely the result, for example, welcome, and the like. Just like the electric wheelchair and Ian Lu who passed through consecutively just now. Or perhaps right now. Was it really Mr. Mo's method? Specious, this was very annoying. Towards Goto Masayoshi's inquiry or confirmation, Mr. Emo didn't have any response. His expression didn't change either, only maintaining a look of interest. He rubbed his chin, as if watching a movie, watching the image transmitted back from thousands of miles away. Instead, Ian Lu, who was behind him, seemed to have lost control of her expression. She had already unconsciously opened her mouth, looking a little sluggish. Returning to the axis of chaos, there was no doubt that Cadman was still in pain. In terms of his mental state, his change was more intense than anyone else's. The direct, inexplicable, and even unreasonable threat impact shook his will in the most direct manner. At this moment, from the angle he was standing at, other than Hood, no one else could see his face clearly. But regardless of whether it was in the conference room or the passenger terminal thousands of miles away, everyone could see that this originally handsome man's cheeks and muscles were currently distorted like a monster. Perhaps it was precisely because of the compression of these muscles, Cadman let out a completely different scream, "Let go of me." His next move was basically about to tear off his entire right arm, but the bloody flame steadily and resolutely spread over his shoulder, burning his neck, torso, and head. Along the way, it also ignited his originally intact left hand. Jaa! Hood displayed the decisiveness of an operation team leader. He exhaled and shouted, forming his right hand into a knife hand and slashed down towards Cadman's abdomen. The air where his fingertips and forearm touched was clearly distorted, as though it was covered in a layer of invisible flames. The format of fire. Although he was shocked by the scene before him for 3 seconds, Hood's follow-up reaction was still the fastest. He quickly made a judgment that this was inextricably linked to Cadman's use of the violent flame seal to mobilize the power of blood and fire. As it turned out, this was a foolish act that provoked the Blood Flame Order's authority, but first, the connection between the two had to be severed. Hood's individual strength was certainly not at the level where he could contend against the fundamental strength of the Blood Flame Order. But the instant he made his move, all the members of the operation team inside and outside the conference room instantly synchronized under the drive of the 7th-generation dynamo core. They jointly constructed a tight, formatted space and formed the greatest support for Hood's hand blade that his physical body could withstand. This was already the strongest attack that Hood could unleash while not wearing his armor. The clothes on Cadman's chest silently tore open, and the lower half fell down, exposing the muscles of his chest and abdomen, as well as the blood-colored flames that were burning on it. And in that 1 second, or maybe half a second, the fiery tail of the flames was pressed down. It was indeed pressed down, but that was all. Time passed by another time, and the blood-colored flames once again began to expand wantonly. The format of fire, which was known to be able to format all extraordinary powers in the world, didn't play its intended role. Hood felt as though his knife hand had cut into a layer of thick cloth that was soaked in water. Most of the power had already dissipated in the distorted and chaotic structure before it could make contact. Cadman screamed once more. Completely at a loss, he instinctively flung his left hand that had just come into contact with the flames. He wanted to fling the flames away, but it was all in vain. The speed at which the blood-colored flames spread wasn't particularly fast, but as long as they came into contact with it, they wouldn't be extinguished. At that moment, Cadman's entire upper body had already been completely covered by the blood-colored flames, including his entire head. The corners of his eyes had already burst open. What splashed out wasn't blood, but like the residue of burning plastic. There were even more flames flickering in and out of the other orifices of his 5 senses. No one knew what Cadman was feeling at that moment. The seemingly harmless flames brought him unimaginable pain. But it was very obvious that Cadman's mental barrier had already been burned to ashes. He began to shout frantically. "Let me go. I beg you. God. Spareem." Hood's fingertips were a little numb. This was most likely due to the interference of his emotions. Had the direct contact just now attracted the demonic fire over? In the depths of his thoughts, there was no doubt that there was fear and dread. This made Hood's mood even worse. Driven by his emotions, he was desperate. He roared in the direction of the projection, "Jimmy, damn it, why are you guys just standing there? Do you think you're useful?" The emotional shout made most of the people at the passenger terminal turn their gazes to Captain Jimmy, who had been berated. In the blink of an eye, he became the center of attention, but Captain Jimmy's reaction was unexpected. He didn't speak. He didn't communicate. He didn't act against Mr. Mo, who was just inches away from him, as Hood had hoped. Instead, he followed his earlier trend and retreated, his speed increased explosively. It was also at this moment that a cold and hard mechanical voice came out of nowhere. "Warning, your actions have already constituted a first-degree intentional murder using extraordinary power. Please immediately stop and deal with it harmlessly. Otherwise, we will take action." The sudden and strange warning caused everyone to be somewhat distracted. And at this moment, Captain Jimmy had already swept past Goto Masayoshi and the veteran from the back. He used their bodies as cover to increase the distance between him and Mr. Mo. Then, he crashed heavily into the front section of a parked flying car. The clack of the mechanical parts disassembling and reattaching did not stop. The outer shell of the crashed car seemed to come alive. It transformed into a set of metal components and gathered around Captain Jimmy's body. It instantly formed a set of exoskeleton armor, arming him to the teeth. Captain Jimmy looked like he was coming over empty-handed. In fact, he had his Deep Blue Walker exoskeleton follow him in a stealthy state. It could be upgraded to its strongest state at any time. Even before Captain Jimmy's transformation, the moment Captain Jimmy began to retreat and the mechanical voice sounded its warning, there was a bang from the surface of the lake near the shore. 2 water pillars exploded and 2 fully armed Deep Blue Walkers leapt out of the water's surface. Because their synchronization rate was too high, the 2 splashing sounds seemed to merge into one. The ice storm machine cannon in their hands had long since locked onto Mr. Mo in the wheelchair and began to preheat and idle. The special physical ammunition built inside was specially designed to deal with the powerful interference power of spiritual type ability users. It sprayed out in a form similar to a metal storm. Coupled with the support of the formatting domain, it could instantly tear apart a B-rank spiritual type ability user. After the preheating was complete, Captain Jimmy was fully armed. The automatic mechanical sound also came to an end. Captain Jimmy had no intention of playing it again. He directly issued an attack order through the 7th generation dynamo core and the Apocalypse array it was linked to. This was the mission he had to complete as the high-level thug of the Amaterasu Order. As for the cause and effect, as well as the meaning behind it, none of it was within the scope of his consideration. The only extra thing he had to do was to give himself a layer of insurance. It was at this moment that Captain Jimmy once again felt a stuffy and astringent feeling assaulting his face. It felt somewhat familiar, just like when he had bumped into Mr. Mo today. It felt like a thick, wet cloth had been thrown over his nose and mouth. Wait a minute. He was already under the protection of the Deep Blue Walker exoskeleton. In the next second, a violent shock attacked him. The Apocalypse array system operating at high speed indicated that the automatic defense function of the sound wave weapon had been activated. It also automatically judged and simultaneously activated the infrasonic wave defense structure. If necessary, it could be activated at the first instance. At the end of last year, when the entire system was still in the experimental stage, it had specially added a targeted plug-in module. For a moment, Captain Jimmy thought that this slightly redundant module was about to be used, but reality proved that he was thinking too much. But on a certain level, his imagination was far from enough. At this moment, the passenger terminal at the shore of Northern Mountain Lake had indeed been attacked by a terrifying noise. The explosive sound wave shock was like a passing storm, engulfing the 100 or so people on the passenger terminal in one go. At this moment, 99% of the people showed signs of either high or low levels of mental confusion. But the Deep Blue Walker defense was effective, and the 2 powerful attackers weren't affected at all. The Ice Storm gun barrel had already begun to spit out ammunition. But right in front of the gun barrel that was rotating at high speed, 2 flesh and blood creations that resembled giant palms inexplicably appeared. One on each side, extremely symmetrical. The gun barrel had already locked onto its target, but it was forcefully lifted up by the 2 monstrous giant claws that were wrapped in scales. The powerful kinetic energy of the physical ammunition certainly pierced through them in an instant, but the upward momentum didn't decrease. Flesh and scales splattered everywhere, and the follow-up ammunition had long since flown off to who knew where. The well-trained powerful attackers wanted to make adjustments at the first instance. But the turbulence in the void rushed back and forth. This time, it suddenly leapt to the next level, transforming into a violent and restless mental storm. A series of disturbances and attacks, from incorporeal to tangible, from material to mental, seemed chaotic and complicated, but they converged and integrated into a common source, and then focused to form an explosive point. The lake water that struck the breakwater exploded with a rumble, and a considerable portion of it evaporated into water vapor in midair. The blood-colored flames cut it into fragments until it completely evaporated. It was in this space where water, light, and fire interweaved that a malevolent creature whose entire body was dark red like blood appeared with a roar. It seemed to have rushed up from the bottom of the lake, but its specific trajectory was indistinct. Following the appearance of the vicious creature, the impact of the single-point explosion increased explosively by more than 10 times. Even Captain Jimmy's mind sank a little. The two powerful attackers who had received the direct impact of the mental storm were in a much worse state. A suffocating gap allowed the pair of giant palms that were already badly mangled to fiercely slap the exoskeleton armor, sending them flying away at the same time. Fortunately, before the battle, the team had already completed the connection between the mental and physical plane in advance, realizing the interference and connection between the mental plane and the material plane, creating a tightly formatted space that could jointly bear and divert the external impact. The two people who were hit didn't show any serious injuries. But in this way, the previous ambush-killing move was all a joke. Captain Jimmy cursed. He wanted to attack again, but when he looked at the vicious creature that suddenly appeared by the lake, he was a little stunned. The vicious creature was huge, with long arms and a tortoise's back, almost in the shape of an ape. Although it was habitually hunched, just the body that appeared on the surface of the water was already more than 3 meters, and even so, there was still a section below its thigh that was below the water surface. Its entire body was covered with bulging muscles and dense scales. As it rose and fell like it was breathing, the heat on its body was like a bloody light, like a flame, and it felt like the surrounding water was about to boil. And it was precisely this vicious creature, or perhaps because Mr. Mo who was near the shore felt that it was blocking too much light, so he scolded it. This enormous creature then obediently shrunk its body, curling into a ball and pressing down into the lake, only leaving its neck and shoulders above. It just happened that its huge head passed over the fence, and visually, it was already about the same size as Mr. Mo who was in a wheelchair. Separated by Mr. Mo, Goto Masayoshi carefully observed the vicious creature. In the depths of the dim yellow eyeball, the layers of light became more and more complex, the level of power that was being used also became more and more profound. This caused a huge pressure on his body, causing the blood vessels and tendons around his eye sockets to bulge, especially the temples on both sides. It was almost like a dense net. So ugly. Jiang Zhong, who was very close, seemed to be affected by the sound wave attack. He actually didn't feel any fear, and only muttered his evaluation. The target was a little vague, but they were all suitable, causing the veteran and Ao Ping Rong to look at him. But at this moment, the most eye-catching was still the ugly monkey, and the most important person beside him. From start to finish, Mr. Mo who was in a wheelchair did not move at all. Actually, most of the people on the pier were the same, it was just that the others did not have time to move. As for him, Mr. Mo's gaze was focused on the projected area. He looked quite serious, to the point that he didn't seem to care much about Captain Jimmy's death trap. The people who had just caught their breaths unconsciously followed his gaze, and once again turned their attention to the conference room thousands of miles away. In front of the camera, Cadman, at some point, was already stuck there, his knees bent and his spine curled, his left and right arms half raised, bent into a stiff angle, as if he had raised his hands to surrender, but his crazed raised head made it look more like a prayer of failure. Burp. A strange sound similar to a burp came from the ugly monkey's enormous cranial cavity. The pipe that made the sound was the area on his face equivalent to the mouth and nose. There were no obvious organs there, only dark purple and wrinkled flesh. It felt like a piece of rotten meat. There were a few intermittent openings in the middle, they were all opening up, squeezing out saliva pus. It was more like the sticky lava flowing out of the cracks of a volcano, black and red interweaved, burning the air, about to fall but not yet. On the other side, Goto Masayoshi, who had been observing all this time, suddenly had a twitch in his temple, he noticed. On that lava saliva, the scattered fire pattern cracks faintly pieced together to form a face. And it was getting clearer and clearer, more and more definite. In the projected area, the image of Cadman, who had already turned into a burning statue, became more and more similar, reflecting each other. Chapter 868. It was indeed Cadman. While the two groups of people were separated by thousands of kilometers, most of them could only rely on the visual similarity, as well as the logical reasoning of the situation. Goto Masayoshi had already used his special ability to find conclusive evidence. Although from the perspective of mutual interference, the outline of the human figure in the lava saliva had already been changed beyond recognition by the violent aura of the ugly monkey. But as long as one could grasp the most essential core inside, and then follow the cause and effect to push back, one could basically complete the restoration. That guy Cadman had a physical body, so he was originally unable to achieve the effect of spirit leaving body. But Mr. Mo had also considered this point, and used the lava saliva to create a temporary container, which could also be called a cage, to absorb his soul body over, and also achieved a rather complete reflection. If Cadman didn't mind, it wouldn't be a problem to use that saliva as a body. Goto Masayoshi saw through some things, but the price he had to pay was severe physical discomfort. His eye sockets were burning hot, the dim yellow eyeball was slightly pulsating, bringing up the eyelids and the surrounding blood network, forcing them to increase the speed of blood supply in order to offset the loss of special vision. Goto Masayoshi was really having a hard time. The miraculous actions of the eyeball had already exceeded the upper limit of his consciousness control. What was worth rejoicing was that this effort had obtained corresponding results. And he had also discovered even more. In Goto Masayoshi's eyes, the current projection area was like a demonic mirror. It only reflected the most important part, and then made absurd distortions to all other elements. On both sides of this mirror, no matter whether it was the two parties in the T-City conference room who were closely related to Cadman, or the heavenly people, who were purely there to support, in a sense, had already unified and mutated into a kind of low-level existence. The number of these people, and the difference in their appearance, seemed to no longer have any practical meaning. If one had to forcefully come up with a meaning, it would probably be equivalent to raw materials. People could not believe in the correlation between both sides of the mirror, but this mirror was simultaneously reflecting the panic and fear in their hearts, and it was vividly displayed. These negative emotions that had been detonated and multiplied continuously were being transformed into a special form of existence on the mental level, or perhaps in the deeper realm, and were communicating with Mr. Mo limited by his own level and comprehension. Goto Masayoshi was unable to understand too much. He could only make a superficial description. It was roughly like the pervasive dirty smoke, moving through the gaps between the slight lifting of the heavy cloak. Of course, the smoke leaked out, but the process only happened in an invisible place, in the black box deep within the cloak that was difficult to observe. Over there seemed to be a demon enjoying this special ingredient. It was eating clouds and spitting out smoke in a leisurely manner. And when Goto Masayoshi wanted to pry a step further, what should be sealed was still sealed, what should be chaotic was still chaotic. It shouldn't be. Separated by thousands of miles, the consumption of the tyrannical and terrifying soul absorption wasn't enough to affect the cloak's concealment effect? Or could it be that Mr. Mo's level of control over the Blood Flame Order's fundamental power, as well as the corresponding techniques, allowed him to ignore the obstruction of spacetime and casually manipulate a high-ranking member of the Order like Cadman? If that was the case, Mr. Mo's control over the Blood Flame Order was simply unimaginable. With the existence of such a controller, Madame Halder, as the officiator, was truly purely used for sacrificial purposes. Oh, it couldn't be that the sacrificial object would be Goto Masayoshi, who had forcefully peaked at this level, was reduced to the level of most people, who could only use their poor imagination to make conjectures. At this time, he especially hoped that Captain Jimmy's hand could be a bit more forceful than before, or at the very least, create a bigger gap in the cloak. But the current Captain Jimmy seemed to have been frightened by his thwarted operation. Even though his entire body was covered in armor and his face couldn't be seen, his body showed an obvious sense of stiffness, as if his soul had left his body. Jimmy-kun, still no results. Somewhat unexpectedly, when Goto Masayoshi called out to Captain Jimmy, the latter also contacted him through the preset communication channel. Did you see anything? That monster. What? I'm talking about that ugly monkey, that largest ape-like creature. So what? Captain Jimmy's mood clearly fluctuated. Damn it, have you been scared, silly? It's right there, and you're telling me, so what? Don't tell me you're only looking at its drool. Goto Masayoshi stared blankly. That's right, such a large mutant was right in front of him, why didn't he pay attention to it, and instead was only interested in the drool that this guy dripped? Even though that was also a very important part, the ape-like creature right in front of him was clearly an extremely powerful mutant. For Mr. M.O. to be able to summon it out of nothing, the interference, the consumption, was probably even greater than the long-distance soul-sucking activity under the rules of the order. He actually didn't think of something that was clearly in front of him. Goto Masayoshi faintly felt that it was a bit strange, and felt that Captain Jimmy's mood was too abnormal. He subconsciously asked, "What did you see?" This thing. You don't know. Damn it, don't tell me you don't have the slightest idea. Should I know? Goto Masayoshi was truly a bit confused. He indeed didn't have any related concepts. At this moment, it was as if there was a piece of information that everyone knew, but it was perfectly missed by him. As a social creature, this kind of feeling was terrible. But this also stimulated his curiosity to an even greater degree. The focus of Goto Masayoshi's gaze naturally spread away from that lump of lava saliva that was about to fall, and expanded to the related area around it, that enormous and ugly face that seemed to have half-rotted. The focus of his gaze constantly adjusted, sweeping past the fine scales on the ugly monkey's face, the half-caved-in forehead and crown, the wrinkled flesh, and finally made contact with its protruding crimson eyes. Large and empty, this was Goto Masayoshi's first feeling. But for some reason, he didn't dare to explore further into the depths of the hollow. In reality, at this moment, the frequency and amplitude of his eyelids twitching had increased dramatically. His eyelids that were especially loose due to his emaciation couldn't help but droop, but were stimulated by his eyeballs, and bounced back again. The current Goto Masayoshi seemed to be looking directly at a dazzling light source, looking directly at the sun that was about to rise above and below the horizon. Completely out of instinct, Goto Masayoshi wanted to turn his face away to avoid a direct attack. He indeed completed this action, but what was truly moving was only his neck and head. In his eye sockets, the pair of dim yellow eyeballs didn't move. On the contrary, they even pushed open the eyelids that they were trying to cover, and controlled all the related nerves, blood vessels and muscles, staring fixedly at that ape-like creature's ugly face, especially the large and empty bloody eyes, motionlessly. The dazzling feeling continued to spread over. If it was a normal person, they might have already started crying non-stop. But Goto Masayoshi didn't, because even if the tears were about to flow out, they would still be used by the dim yellow eyeballs as lubricant, better than nothing. Goto Masayoshi's heartbeat suddenly sped up, part of it was due to the fluctuation of emotions caused by losing control, but the other part, which was also an even more important factor, was that the eyeballs needed more blood supply, more nutrition. Goto Masayoshi's body was heating up, but the pores on his skin were abnormally contracting. It was precisely under such a contradictory reaction that even more energy from his limbs and bones were mobilized, rushing upwards in the most efficient manner for the eyeballs to use. Other than that, there was also the endless sunlight from the outside world. At this moment, Mr. Mo's voice sounded again, as if he was talking to Yin Lu. Did you see it clearly? Ah, what? Yin Li's reaction was similar to Goto Masayoshi and Captain Jimmy. Half a second later, she came back to her senses and asked, what exactly is this thing? A type of wondrous creation that I discovered in the past. I call it the rotten mouth ape. I only discovered it recently. Although it looks a bit ugly, its entire body can be converted into energy. And it's relatively easy to mold, and its stability isn't bad. It's a natural building material. Yin Lu. It was also at this moment that the air seemed to ring out with a slight air explosion, similar to the noise of bubbles bursting and air burning. It was very easy for normal people to ignore this kind of sound, but a few ability users with keen senses could determine that this sound originated from the ugly monkey. Oh, it should be the saliva from the rotten mouth ape's mouth, which meant that it came from Cadman's side. A judgment was a judgment, but not many people could clearly determine what Cadman was doing. Until Mr. Mo spoke again. I'm not angry, why should I be angry? There are people in the order who are 10 times, 100 times more excessive than you, and their statuses are even higher than yours. Yin-Le had been a bit absent-minded ever since the rotten mouth ape appeared. She heard Luo Nan speak of a sensitive topic at this time, and she subconsciously wanted to interrupt. Mister, don't listen to his sophistry. It's nothing. Mr. Mo slightly tilted his head. His thin and ordinary face formed a marvelous contrast with the rotten mouth ape's enormous face, which was only separated by a fence. Since the blood flame will was proposed when the order was founded, it is tantamount to giving up a portion of power and the corresponding design. The only reason why a situation like yours has occurred is because the Blood Soul Temple, the foundation of the order, lacks a stable and effective identification and withdrawal mechanism. One is the problem of design ideology, and the other is the problem of design ability. Of course, the lack of reflection and supplementation on the material plane is indeed a troublesome matter. Then there's the problem of the level of the current group of people in the order. Take Cadman for example. He's a blood-sucking bug, yes, but if there's no improvement in the application of ideas, then the vast majority of people in the order are essentially no different from him. Mr. Mo slightly raised his chin when he spoke to this point. He squinted his eyes and looked behind the cloud of fish scales that filled the sky. He looked at the edge of platinum light that cut down. On this point, some people don't hesitate to use materials, but they do it quite brilliantly. Chapter 869. There were always coincidences in this world. At that moment, Mr. Mo looked up and met the observer in the private airship. Even though he knew it was because of the angle of the broadcast, Yukawa Aishuk, who was sitting on the sofa, held his breath. His eyelids twitched, just like a certain guy by the lake. A thought popped up in his mind. He was talking about the true God and the Pope. Yukawa Aishuk quickly ignored this feeling and thought. He forcefully shifted his gaze to the ugly face of the ugly monkey, the ugly face of the rotten mouth ape. Stimulated by the forceful twist, some pieces of information flew out and were about to form a string. There was only one line left. A few seconds later, Yukawa Aishuk suddenly raised his voice, Takamoto, Takamoto. Takamoto Shigeru quickly appeared in the room. Yukawa Aishuk ordered his intelligence chief, the investigation report from the Aptitude User Union, the one about Gongqi, pull it out immediately. Shigeru Takamoto, who was proficient in this business, did not say a word. He completed all of this within 2 seconds and projected the contents of the report onto the projection area. Yukawa Aishuk's eyes widened as he searched for the information he needed. But he was soon disappointed. The report was vague and only reported the death of Gongqi. At the same time, they hoped that branches, powerful organizations, and the church could help investigate the solidification of the abyssal region around May 1st, Chan City time. No, not this. Yukawa Aishuk realized his memory was messed up. He clearly remembered something about it. It's in the internal report of the Jade Society, but it's vague. There's only a simple description of ape-like creatures. Yukawa Aishuk was surprised that it was Bai Xinyan who reminded him. When he checked the relevant content, it was indeed as Bai Xinyan had said. It was only better than nothing. No more detailed information. Transcendents are very proud. They won't describe the death of their own kind so clearly. I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Staying up late will really damage your IQ. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan left the armrest of the sofa. She strode out of the room. Ever since the intercontinental airship incident, Yukawa Aishuk had always been suspicious of Bai Xinyan. But when she really left, he was not used to it. Where are you going? Meeting. Don't disturb me during this time, or I'll be very grateful. Yukawa Aishuk was sure that there was a gap in understanding between him and Bai Xinyan, and this gap seemed to reflect the difference in their information levels. In the era of information and authority, there was nothing more depressing than this kind of gap. What was even more tragic was that people like Bai Xinyan seemed to be many, many more than he had imagined. Along with the shrill siren, the high-altitude region where the clouds were surging was filled with a blinding red light. The image of the environment that was extremely close to reality began to solidify and then fade away. When the visual virtual scene disappeared, the cramped space of the health pod was completely revealed. The warning light on the top of the pod was still flashing rapidly. Tian Bang shook his head. Through the slightly turbid nutrient fluid, he could see the high-priority notifications on the interface of the cabin wall. They glowed red and vibrated continuously, attracting his attention. Due to the limitations of his physical body, Tian Bang decided to use telepathic communication. Dr. Pan, the group's experimental base has been overrun by the mutants? Dr. Pan, who was usually calm and collected, suddenly spoke in a hurried tone, which was rare for him. Big news, big trouble, big opportunity. Anyway, hurry up. I'll give you 20 seconds. Please, I'm in the health pod right now. Oh, that's true. Speaking of which, the health pod simulator is more useful than the helmet. Fine, just stay there. I'll open the communication channel to you. You have 10 seconds now, including the time to look at the data. The communication was then cut off. Immediately after, a portion of the health pod broke away from Tian Bang's control and entered remote conference mode. It guided Tian Bang's senses and projected him into a huge conference hall. The standard of the conference was definitely very high. It was similar to the ring-shaped conference hall where the Star Alliance held a global board meeting. Yes, wait a minute. That's right. Although Tian Bang had never spoken here, he had been one of the people in charge of the security forces and had strolled around inside before. He had already seen the Star Alliance's logo that could be seen everywhere in the conference hall. It looked like a printed simplified map of Earth. Some said that it symbolized the coexistence of the common world and the inner world since the era of distortion. Some said that it was a hint of the existence of the deep blue world when the Star Alliance was first established. Perhaps it really was a big scene. However, the conference had probably been held in a hurry. The conference hall, which could accommodate thousands of people, was mostly empty. The figures were all concentrated near the ring-shaped conference table in the center, and some of the empty seats still had figures appearing intermittently. Tian Bang felt that he should thank Dr. Pan, who had given him the right to choose his image during the virtual projection. Therefore, what appeared in this conference hall of the highest standard was only a humanoid shadow. Otherwise, he would probably be known throughout the world as the Blood Prison Exhibitionist. Good thing I didn't miss it. Dr. Pan appeared beside him. He was still wearing the white lab coat, but it suited his image very well. Tian Bang chuckled. Thank you very much. Dr. Pan waved his hand. Don't worry about those useless things. Watch carefully and digest it well. Although we're just here to listen, we might have a speaking mission. Oh. To be honest, I'm a little nervous. I've never seen so many extraordinaries in my life. They're all top-notch material. Tian Bang, half a second later, his gaze suddenly cut to the ring-shaped conference table in front of him. The ring-shaped area in the middle was already playing an image, in the form of a 30-fold fast-forward. This kind of highly compressed video data would cause a normal person to faint. However, a burner like Tian Bang could use the Dynamo Core's analysis function to directly reorganize the information. As for those who chose this kind of unconventional method to receive information, Tian Bang's gaze swept past the faces and backs of those people in order to compare them with the built-in database. That yellow-bearded old man is the president of the headquarters, Abner. On the left is Marin, who was beaten up badly by him last time. On the right is the number 1 ward master, Dale. And there's the Monroe Cannon. Sitting behind Abner is Li Baizhou. Looking at where she's sitting, she's attending the conference as a reporter. Next to her is Ghost Eye. That old pervert still wants to take advantage of her in the virtual world. Her Majesty Empress Wu is also here. Is it really good to favor one and discriminate against the other? Next to Empress Wu is Ouyang Chen. He's always serious. Speaking of which, the seating arrangement at the society's side is a little messy. The seat diagonally across from us is empty, but there's a balanced scale. Clearly, the Archbishop of the Order of Justice is also coming. The bald Pope of the Order of Amaterasu has already arrived. Only the most mysterious High Lord of Secret Contract is left. Oh, I can only see the back of his head from where I am. That's right. This was a conference of extraordinaries. It was a dialogue between high-level life forms that had climbed to the top of the world. However, the beginning was nothing out of the ordinary. President Abner coughed and spoke in a gentle and feminine tone. There are still a few who haven't arrived yet, but since we've caught up with the live broadcast, we won't wait any longer. Let's watch while we discuss and exchange our opinions. As he spoke, the video playing at high speed slowed down and entered normal mode. The most eye-catching thing in the video was undoubtedly the huge and ugly face of the demon. Half of its body had caved in, and the other half had rotted away. There was also the lava mouth that was dripping down, as if it could fall to the ground at any time. All these factors fiercely occupied the attention of the audience. However, what attracted Tian Bang's attention the most, which was also the focus of the video, was the man sitting in a wheelchair beside him. He looked unfamiliar and a little too thin, as if he was ill. However, at this moment, he was quite relaxed. Perhaps it was because of the sudden change in speed, but the body language of the man in the wheelchair seemed to be slow and unruffled. He was giving a demonstration to the woman behind him who was gently holding the wheelchair. Look, with this half-energy, half-material thing as a foil, Cadman's body and soul structure is a lot more straightforward. Limited by the conditions, we can only look at the general outline. You should be able to find the resonance structure related to the blood-soul temple. Understand the relationship, and then refer to the actual emotional state of a life form, and you'll roughly know where the problem lies. The man in the wheelchair explained while his hands did not stop moving. His fingertips made a few horizontal and vertical cuts in the air, cutting the dripping lava mouth into 20 to 30 parts of different sizes. Not counting the scraps on the periphery, the main part of the cut was clearly a scaled-down human body, including the head, shoulders, chest, abdomen, spine, limbs, and the isolated internal organs. There were also fiery threads in between. They were like the connecting lines of a doll, but they were also like the blood vessels and nerves of a real human body. It was precisely this dismembered lava mold. The head at the top had already been cut off. It was the size of a date, but it had complete facial features. At this moment, it was completely distorted by fear and pain. Unfortunately, not many people could clearly hear what it was shouting. Inside the virtual venue, most people had dull expressions, but there were also some who were overflowing with interest. This person is certainly an outstanding surgeon. He's also very good at teaching and educating people. Sitting on the right side of President Abner was the world's top boundary grandmaster, Constance Dale. She was still dressed as a medieval witch. Her hood covered her face, and the corners of her lips were half hidden. She carried out her favorite mysticism. Because of this person, I think of another person. He also loves to preach. The legendary Professor Luo. Didn't he come to the conference today? Oh, you're talking about Luo Nan? President Abner stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. His tone was still gentle. This time, it's an analysis and discussion on the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. It's an invitation system. Luo Nan isn't a relevant person. But according to the theory and level of strength he's displayed recently, he's certainly qualified. As he spoke, Abner cast his gaze towards Ouyang Chen, who was a bit far away. Although it was a virtual world, his gaze was still solid. Oh, Ouyang. Why don't your branch contact him? If it's convenient, invite him over. Everyone can exchange what they need. It was probably only in this sort of situation that these old extraordinaries would speak so bluntly. However, this battle of tongues, which was about to expand, was, to put it bluntly, each family expressing their position. There was no substantial pressure. President Abner's smiling face was the clearest benchmark. Of course, the earliest pressure was washed away by Zhang Yingying's fearless speech. Or perhaps, the time wasn't right yet. Her Majesty Empress Wu reluctantly concluded, compared to the Amaterasu order, President Abner really does care and cherish. Especially his speech. It's incisive, deep and shallow. It's very targeted and instructive. Oh my, where did your extraordinary bearing go? Tian Bang finally laughed out loud. He wasn't the only one who laughed. He wasn't even in the minority. Her Majesty Empress Wu became more and more open-minded amidst her laughter. The only pity is that he beat around the bush a bit. I'm afraid that only you, President, can speak so clearly. How about this? This is the communication method over there. Everyone, no need to be polite. You can discuss and research, or call each other brothers. Just go ahead. I also really want to know what kind of brilliant argument he can make today. As she spoke, Her Majesty Empress Wu tossed out a white bead of light. It spun around in the live broadcast area. It was none other than the special effects of Luo Nan's message link. Tian Bang casually scanned it and confirmed that there were no mistakes. There were quite a few people who did the same thing as him. Luo Nan would probably receive quite a few friend requests after today's meeting. President Abner maintained his smile. He turned his head and instructed Marlin, send an invitation to Professor Luo right now. If he's free, invite him to participate in this discussion. Everyone is looking forward to the splendid explanation that configuration theory will give to this world. Then he changed the topic of conversation. Before the situation changes, everyone should first understand the background information of today's meeting. See why this meeting is being held, and choose this person. Mr. Mo was quite cooperative in the live broadcast. His lecture was neither fast nor slow. It looked like it would continue for quite some time. On the other hand, Vice President Marlin had just made arrangements to contact Luo Nan. He also had to introduce specific information. He was quite busy for a time. The main topic of this meeting is to ask everyone to identify the true murderer of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi's murder case. Around 4:00 in the afternoon on the 1st of May in Chan City, Deputy Secret Chief Gong was assassinated in his seclusion location. Unfortunately, he perished. The specific circumstances have already been reported. I won't go into detail this time. Headquarters has invited experts to earnestly analyze the scene.